Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're heading deep into South Texas, where long highways cut through empty desert, and the stories passed between drivers and locals are more than just legends. Out here, strange things happen on the road. People vanish, time slips, and every once in a while, someone sees something they can't explain and never talk about again. But before we begin, don't make the same mistake most viewers do. They leave without subscribing, and by doing that, they miss out on the creepiest true stories we find. So hit that subscribe button now, and turn on the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Also let us know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it right now? Because no matter where you are, some stories, they find you? Now let's get into it. These are 20 true creepy road encounters near the Texas border. Earl McGowan wasn't the type to spook easy. 40 years of hauling across Texas, highways had hardened him into the kind of man who drank coffee like motor oil and trusted his gut more than any GPS. The stretch from Brownsville to San Antonio was one he knew well, especially Route 281 with its straight, hypnotic roads and patches of scrubland that looked like nothing and led to nowhere. It was late September, the kind of night where the heat hadn't quite given up the ghost yet, and the air was still thick with that swampy kind of humidity you only find near the southern tip of the state. He'd just finished unloading a shipment of restaurant supplies in Brownsville, nothing interesting, nothing dangerous, and was looking forward to catching the late news and maybe a cold beer at home in Bernie. He didn't like staying overnight in the valley anymore. Too many stories from other drivers about things happening along the border roads at night, figures in the dark, shapes on the shoulder, lights where no lights should be. Superstition and tequila, he told himself. Nothing more. But as he passed through Fall Furious, where the last decent gas station sat like a tired dog at the edge of the town, his headlights caught something unusual. At first, he thought it was an animal. A deer, maybe, or one of those wild hogs that come out to sniff at the roadkill. But as he got closer, he realized it was a girl, just standing there off to the right side of the road, near one of those rusted signs that says, "Watch for livestock." She was barefoot, in a thin white dress that looked like it had been pulled through a briar patch. Long black hair, limp with sweat or water. Her arms hung at her sides like she'd been forgotten by gravity, just dangling. He slowed instinctively. Something about her made the hairs on the back of his neck stand straight up, the way she didn't move, the way the night air around her looked stiller than it should have been. Even the wind seemed to curve around her, like it wanted no part of her. As his headlights settled on her, she turned. There was no face. Where her eyes and nose and mouth should have been, there was just smooth skin, like someone had pulled a nylon stocking over a skull and stretched it tight, but there was nothing beneath. No indentations, no lips, just flesh. Earl's foot came off the brake and slammed the gas pedal hard enough to make the cab jolt. His rig roared back into life, tires barking against the blacktop as he rocketed past the spot where she stood. In the split second he passed her, he felt the air inside the cab shift, like something had gotten in. Like a draft from an open window. He didn't look back. Not at first, but instinct is a funny thing. It creeps up on you. You can fight it, push it down, try to ignore the itch in your spine, but eventually, it gets you. He glanced in the rearview mirror. She was in the back seat. It didn't make sense. His cab was locked, and no one could have gotten in without him noticing, but there she was, sitting bolt upright in the sleeper berth behind him. Same white dress, same dark hair, still no face. Her head tilted slightly, like a child studying a bug. Earl swerved, nearly putting the 18-wheeler into the ditch. His heart pounded so hard it hurt. He didn't scream, didn't cry. He was too old and too stubborn for that. Instead, he gripped the wheel with knuckles gone white and just kept driving. The next 3 hours he didn't stop. Not for gas, not for a bathroom, not even to breathe properly. He just drove, trying to keep his eyes on the road and not on the mirror. But every now and then, he'd look and she'd still be there. Still silent, still watching. Not moving, not blinking. Just sitting. It wasn't until he hit the outskirts of San Antonio, with the glowing sprawl of I-35 opening up in front of him like a lifeline, that she vanished. Not slowly, not with drama. One moment she was there, the next she wasn't. Gone like a switch flipped. And just like that, the cab felt normal again. Warm, humid, smelling faintly of diesel and stale coffee. He pulled into the first truck stop. He could find one of those 24-hour beacons for the damned and sleep-deprived, and sat in the lot for a full 15 minutes before stepping out. When he did, his knees almost buckled. Earl didn't tell anyone that night. He didn't call the cops. What could he have said? I saw a faceless girl on the side of the road and she got in my truck without opening a door. They'd have dragged him in for a breathalyzer and a psych eval before sunrise. Instead, he checked in with dispatch, got a motel room down the block, and spent the night sitting on the edge of the bed with the lights on, listening for any sound. Behind him, the hum of the air conditioner, the occasional truck passing by outside, and once, just once, the faintest sound of something breathing behind the closet door. He didn't check. The next morning he drove home like nothing had happened, washed his truck, told himself it was stress, that maybe he'd nodded off, that maybe it was a dream. A trick of the headlights. Except things didn't go back to normal. Week later, he noticed handprints on the inside of the passenger side window. Small, like a child's. He wiped them clean, but the next day, they were back. He started having dreams. In every one, he was driving that same stretch past Falfurrias. And every time, the girl was there, standing by the road, waiting. In one dream, she stepped in front of his truck and he couldn't stop. In another, she climbed into the cab and whispered something in a voice like glass breaking. "You brought me home." He took time off, 6 weeks, tried to relax, visited his sister in New Braunfels, tried fishing, tried praying. Nothing helped. The last time anyone saw Earl McGowan was in early November. He'd told a few friends at the diner he was heading back south to set things straight. He was pale, jittery, sweating even though the morning was cold. His rig was found 2 days later, parked at the edge of Route 281 near Falfurrias, right by that rusted livestock sign. Doors locked. No sign of Earl. Inside, the only thing they found was a white dress draped across the driver's seat, soaked through with something dark. The CB radio was still on, crackling softly, repeating one phrase over and over in Earl's voice, though it didn't sound quite right. "She's in the back." Elena had always hated long drives at night, but her cousin Marta insisted they take the back roads after the Quincy era. "It's faster this way," Marta had said, adjusting her gold heels on the passenger side floorboard. "Less traffic. And I don't want to run into a checkpoint not dressed like this." They were maybe 30 miles out from Rio Grande City, winding through the dark hush of South Texas brushland. The asphalt ribbon of Farm to Market 755 stretched ahead and hazy. Darkness, illuminated by the dim yellow spill of Elena's aging Corolla headlights. The moon had ducked behind thick clouds, and the only things visible outside the road were barbed wire fences and endless walls of mesquite, hisaki, and thorn scrub, the kind that swallowed light and sound. It was nearing 1:30 a.m. when Marta reached forward and twisted the dial on the radio. A cumbia song fizzled out in a low, watery hiss. Marta turned it back, thinking it was just the station fading. But there was nothing. She scanned again. Static. She frowned, letting the dial spin slowly through FM and then M. Nothing but the high, whining sound of white noise. Maybe we're too far out, Elena said, trying to hide her nerves. She gripped the wheel tighter. We were listening just 10 minutes ago, Marta said. Radio doesn't cut out like that. Something's wrong. That's when the voice came. At first, it was just the hiss, high and hissing like an old TV left on the wrong channel. Then a crackle. Then something else, like a whisper trying to push its way through. You're not supposed to be here. It was unmistakable. Low, male, flat, like someone speaking right into your ear. Marta froze, hand still on the dial. Did you hear that? Yeah. They looked at each other. Neither of them laughed. It's probably a prank, Elena said quickly. Like someone screwing around with a ham radio or something. In the middle of nowhere? Marta whispered. That's when the dashboard lights dimmed. The speedometer needle trembled. The engine began to sputter, a dry, uneven cough that sounded like a dying breath. No, don't, Elena said, lightly pumping the gas, but it was no use. The Corolla gave one last shudder and died. Headlights went black. The engine ticked as it cooled. Everything around them went still. They sat in the car, swallowed by silence. Not quiet, silence. No wind, no bugs, no chirps of night birds or hum of distant traffic. Nothing. Then they heard it. Something was breathing. Not close, not yet, but audible. Heavy, deliberate, coming from just beyond the ditch, past the tangle of mesquite and needlebrush. Elena didn't move. She didn't blink. She felt the breath in her chest stall, then restart with a tight, trembling rhythm. Marta slowly reached over and locked the doors. Stay inside, she said. They sat like that for hours, the air thick with the smell of dying engine heat and the slow reek of sweat from fear. The breath in the brush never stopped, just stayed there, a patient rhythm of in and out, like someone crouching behind the trees, watching, waiting. Sometimes it moved. Subtle shifts, like something pacing along the edge of their vision. A shuffle here, a snap of twigs there. A pause, and that breathing. Always the breathing. Once, Marta thought she saw something. 2 glints, like animal eyes reflecting, but when she looked again, they were gone. They didn't speak. They didn't even try their phones. Both had 1 bar of signal before, but now the screens just showed no service in that soft, mocking gray text. At one point, maybe around 3 a.m., maybe later, the radio hiss returned all by itself. They hadn't touched it. The voice came back. Look behind you, Marta screamed. Elena twisted in her seat, back against the door, breath shuddering, eyes wide. There was nothing in the back seat, nothing visible. But the air was thick, too thick, like someone else was in the car. They waited for dawn. They watched the sky with dry, red eyes as the horizon peeled back, layer by layer, into deep cobalt and faint bruised orange. At 6:08 a.m., the Corolla's dashboard flickered. The engine coughed, once, twice, then purred back to life like nothing had happened. The headlights popped on. The radio picked up mid-song, some Tejano station halfway through a track. They didn't say anything. Elena just shifted into drive and took off, tires spitting gravel behind them. They didn't even realize they were crying until they saw the Rio Grande City sign come into view, framed by the weak light of early morning. They didn't tell anyone. Not really. Elena's mother noticed the look in her daughter's eyes when she got home. That distant, hollow stare like someone who'd seen something too big to understand, but when she asked what was wrong, Elena just shook her head. But strange. Things started happening after that. Marta had nosebleeds. Bad ones. Every night, around the same time, 1:30 a.m. She stopped sleeping. Said there was something outside her window, breathing.
Always breathing. Elena tried to forget, tried to move on.
But sometimes, while driving to work down the highway, the radio would fuzz for half a second, just half a second, and in that brief, warbled burst of static, she swore she could hear the words, "You're still not supposed to be here. 2 weeks after the night on FM. 755, Marta disappeared. Her room was locked from the inside. Her car was still in the driveway, but she was gone. No signs of struggle. Number: broken windows. Just a faint smell in the room, not rot, not perfume. Something older, earthy like dirt and roots. On her wall, written in shaky black marker, was a single line. I saw it. It saw me back. Elena doesn't drive at night anymore. She moved in with her aunt in San Antonio and got a job in an office with no windows. She keeps her radio off, but sometimes when the lights flicker or the air gets too still, she hears it, soft and low and steady, like lungs pulling air in just outside the door. And if she turns the volume up on the TV to drown it out, sometimes she hears static. And then, "You're not supposed to be here." Raymond Vargas had driven that long, straight stretch of Highway 90 west of Del Rio more times than he could count. It was the kind of road that makes you forget you're moving, where the darkness swallows the landscape and the only sound is the hum of your tires against the cracked asphalt. On this particular August night, the desert air shimmered with leftover heat, and his old Silverado groaned under the weight of the equipment strapped in the back. He was headed back to Sanderson. After a job south of the border, a generator install for a ranch that didn't want questions asked about its power needs. It was a cash gig, the kind Ray took more often lately. He kept to himself, didn't ask about the militia stickers or the barbed wire fences, just did his work and got out. It was after midnight when he saw the lights, red and blue, flickering through his rearview mirror like a heartbeat. Border Patrol, he figured. They were common enough along that stretch, especially at night. He wasn't carrying anything illegal, but he still got that clench in his gut, same as anyone else who'd spent enough time near the border. Ray slowed, pulled onto the shoulder just before a rusted mile marker near a dry creek bed, and killed the engine. Dust floated around him like fog in the beams of the patrol lights. The vehicle behind him was a standard white and green SUV, its decals dim in the moonlight. A single figure stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the familiar olive drab uniform and cap. The man didn't speak as he approached. He didn't shine a light into the truck. He just walked up slow, boots crunching on gravel, until he stood at Ray's window. Then he stared. Ray rolled the window down about halfway. "Evenin'," he said. "Something wrong?" The man didn't answer. His face was shadowed under the brim of his cap, but Ray could just make out pale skin, eyes like dead river stones. There was something off about the man's posture. His arms hung too low, fingers grazing the outside of Ray's door like feelers. "I said, is there a problem?" Ray asked again, now less polite. That's when the man moved. He didn't reach, he slid forward, like his shoulder dislocated to let his arm shoot through the half-open window. The hand that grabbed Ray's forearm was ice-cold and wrong. The fingers were longer than any human should be, thin and almost jointless, like stretched cartilage wrapped in waxy skin. They wrapped around his arm and tightened. Ray tried to scream, but it came out strangled. Then instinct took over. He slammed his foot down on the gas. The Silverado lurched forward with a roar. The arm stretched, the hand still gripping him even as the rest of the man was dragged out of frame. There was a sound, wet and tearing, like splitting pork. Then a snapping pop, something rubbery giving way, and suddenly Ray was alone in the cab again, except for the hand. The goddamn hand. It was still attached to him. Not holding him anymore, no grip, but still stuck there. Fingers wrapped loosely around his wrist like it had just forgotten to let go. He shouted and swerved, trying to shake it off, slapping at it with his free hand, but the fingers just twitched, like they were feeling for a new grip. He could feel it moving, curling, as if still alive. Near Comstock, he finally tore it off and flung it out the window into the night. It hit the gravel with a wet slap and rolled into the brush. Ray didn't look back at the Border Patrol station. In Del Rio the next morning, he looked like hell-eyes bloodshot, shirt stained with sweat and something darker, hands shaking like a man who just crawled out of a wreck. He told the story straight. No embellishment, no dramatics. Just the facts. The man who stared without speaking. The arm that moved wrong. The severed hand that tried to keep holding him. The duty officer, a heavy-set guy with a buzz cut and a red man stain on his lip, listened without much expression. When Ray finished, the man leaned back, sighed, and said the line that would haunt Ray more than anything else. "We didn't have anyone working that stretch last night." Ray waited for a laugh or a wink, but it didn't come. The officer just stared at him for a long moment, then reached under the desk and pulled out a dog-eared binder. He flipped through it slowly, as if he'd done this before. When he stopped, he tapped a page and turned it around. "You recognize this?" It was a sketch, charcoal on yellowed paper. A man in a uniform border patrol or something close, but the details were wrong. The face was flat, almost melted looking, the eyes too far apart, mouth hanging slightly open like it had never learned how to close, and the arms too long, too thin. A caption beneath read simply, La Mano Larga del Rio Incidents, 1967-1991. Ray said nothing. Just nodded. Later that day, driving back toward Sanderson, he passed the same dry creek bed. Nothing unusual. No sign of the SUV, no sign of the hand. But for the next few nights, Ray dreamed of it. The hand crawling, scraping up the side of his bed frame, tapping on the window in the dark. Weeks passed. The nightmares faded, but then other things began happening. Small things at first. His dog, an old pit mutt named Rico, started growling at the window every night around the same time. Never barked, just growled low and steady, hackles raised like he saw something just outside the glass. Ray started seeing flashes of red and blue in his rearview mirror even when there were no cars behind him. He stopped pulling over. Stopped. Looking. Then came the noise. It was always around 1:13, a musk-scraping sound on the roof of the trailer, like fingers dragging slowly across the tin. He'd run outside more than once, flashlight in hand, but there was never anything there. Not until the fourth night. That time, the flashlight caught something slipping off the edge of the roof. A hand, just a hand. White, long-fingered, writhing like a boneless animal as it disappeared behind the building. He bought a shotgun the next day, but no gun mattered when the voices started. They came from the walls. Whispered Spanish and English. Phrases, fragments of interrogation. Where are you going? Papers, per favor. Do you know why I stopped you tonight? Mixed in with a static hiss, like an old CB radio stuck between channels. Sometimes Ray could almost swear he heard his own voice, panicked. From that night on Highway 90, the worst came 3 weeks after the incident. Ray was coming home late. From a job near Marathon, sun already dipped behind the low hills when his truck's engine started coughing. He checked the gauge's full tank, temp normal. But the truck rolled to a stop anyway, right there on a stretch of road with no shoulder. And no cell signal. Then the lights came. Not headlights this time. Not red and blue. Just white, bright, flickering white like a flare burning underwater. They came from behind the brush. 1 light, then 2, then 5. Moving in a slow, deliberate line. Figures stepped forward tall, uniformed, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets dragged by invisible strings. Ray didn't wait. He ran into the desert, leaving the truck behind. He ran until he couldn't breathe, until the lights were gone and the night was dark again. He slept under a mesquite tree, cradling his shotgun, and walked back at dawn. The truck was still there. The doors were open. Inside, on the driver's seat, was a torn strip of uniform fabric, Border Patrol green, still wet with something dark and sticky. Ray doesn't drive at night anymore. He keeps every light on in his house and duct tapes the windows shut. He moved to a trailer park in Fort Stockton, but sometimes he still hears the scratching, even there. He still dreams of long arms reaching through narrow spaces. And sometimes, just before he wakes, he can feel a hand on his wrist, still gripping. Wade Barnett had been driving long haul since '93, back when you could still trust a payphone and half the truck stops between El Paso and Houston hadn't been bought out by the big chains. He liked the solitude, the hum of the road, the way. West Texas stretched out like God had forgotten to finish it. Most nights out there, especially past midnight, you'd swear you were the only man alive. Just you, the asphalt, and the endless black. That's why he noticed them. He was heading east on Highway 90, somewhere between Marathon and Sanderson, a lonely stretch of road that wound through scrub brush, low hills, and dry riverbeds. Air had that dry bite to it, the kind that sneaks in under the cab and chills your feet no matter how tight the seals are. Wade had a load of sheet metal bound for a yard in San Antonio, a regular haul. Nothing strange about it. He'd done that. Run maybe 30 times. Same route, same rhythm. But this time, something was wrong. It started around 3 a.m. The road had been dead for over an hour. No taillights ahead, no headlights behind, just the occasional jackrabbit frozen in the beam before darting off into the brush. Wade had the CB on, mostly out of habit. Nobody'd said anything for miles. The static was a kind of company, something to break the silence. Then it cut out. Just like that mid-sentence. Some guy from Laredo was jawing about a busted way station and then snap nothing. Just dead air. Not even static, just silence. Wade tapped the knob, adjusted the squelch. Nothing. He figured maybe it was interference, a hill or something. He was about to reach over and kill the whole thing when his headlights flickered twice fast, like a warning. Like when a bulb's about to go, only he'd changed them both 2 weeks ago and had checked the alternator that morning. He sat up straighter. Something in his gut clenched. That's when he saw them. 3 semis. Big ones. Black. No lights, no chrome. No visible markings, no dot numbers, no license plates, nothing. They were a few hundred feet back, just silhouettes against the starlit road, but they were unmistakable. Their forms were too perfect to be shadows, too solid. He hadn't seen them in the mirrors before, but now they were there. In a perfect staggered formation, one in the center lane, 2 flanking at angles behind, like an escort. Wade's first. Instinct was to radio, but the CB was still dead. Not a whisper, just empty. He eased off the gas. Not brake, just enough to see if they'd pass. They didn't. They stayed behind him. Same distance. Same spacing. Matching his speed exactly. That's when the fear started to crawl up from his stomach. He could feel it in his throat, in the sweat that suddenly broke along his spine. He checked the mirrors again, still there. 3 of them. Black rigs, no lights. No sound. He turned off the music. Just the hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of loose straps on the trailer. After a mile, he hit the brakes lightly, not a panic stop. Just enough to drop 15 miles per hour. The truck slowed too. Still no lights. Still no pass. His. Headlights flickered again. This time they dimmed for a full second, the dash lights with them. Then back to normal. "God damn it," he muttered. "Not now." He tapped the brakes harder, almost a full stop. Then, with a shaky hand, pulled onto the shoulder. Dust and gravel kicked up around him as the wheels crunched off the pavement. He leaned out his window, staring at the rear view. The black trucks coasted to a stop on the highway behind him, maybe. 30 feet back. No sound. No diesel idle. No glow from the grills or undercarriage. Just still. Wade's breath fogged the inside of the window. It wasn't cold enough for that. He watched, waited. Nothing moved. And then, as if agreeing silently, he eased back onto the road, shifting gears with a trembling hand. The black trucks followed. For 40 miles, they stayed back there, never gaining, never falling, always the same. Wade tried to shake them, gunning the engine on straightaways, taking curves hot, even pulling a rolling swerve to see if they reacted. They did. Every move he made, they mirrored. It felt like a game. Or a hunt. Then, in the middle of nowhere, a flickering neon caught his eye, an old gas station sign, barely legible. Gas, deli, showers. He didn't remember it being there. He'd passed this stretch too many times. But at that moment, he didn't care. He needed people, lights, noise. Anything. He yanked the wheel hard and pulled into the lot. The station looked dead. One sodium light buzzed over a rusted diesel pump. The store's windows were dark, except for the red glow of a drink cooler. He rolled to a stop and sat, both hands white-knuckled on the wheel. He watched the mirror. He waited for the convoy to pass. They didn't. Minutes ticked by. No trucks. No movement. Wade got out, his boots crunching on the cracked pavement. He walked to the edge of the lot, heart in his throat, and looked down the highway. Nothing. No lights. No rigs. No sound. He walked out to the shoulder, squatting down in the dust, and stared at the asphalt. No tire marks. None. He swore he'd slammed. The brakes at least once back there should have left tread. But the road was clean, untouched. He checked the shoulder. His own rig's tires had left shallow impressions in the gravel, like you'd expect. But there were no tracks behind him. No indentations. No dust trails. It was like they hadn't existed at all. He sat there for a long time. Eventually, the sun started bleeding up over the hills, painting the sky a dirty orange. That's when he noticed the gas station behind him looked different. The neon sign was gone. The windows were boarded up. The pump was rusted so bad it looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. There were weeds growing up through the asphalt. Nothing moved. Wade climbed back into his truck and kept driving. He didn't stop until Del Rio. By then, the CB had crackled back to life and his headlights worked fine. He tried to tell another trucker about it. A guy hauling livestock out of Pecos. The man just went quiet. "You saw him too?" he said. After a long pause, Wade blinked. "You know about them?" "Don't talk about 'em on the radio," the man said. "They hear it. They like it." He cut the channel. Wade never took Highway 90 again after that. He rerouted everything, even if it cost him extra gas or time. Didn't matter. Something about that stretch between Marathon and Sanderson, it wasn't right. Never had been. Some folks say those trucks show up for drivers who've been on the road too long, who've nodded off too many times and lived when they shouldn't have. Like maybe the ghost convoy's there to remind you that every mile's a borrowed one. Others say they're government rigs from some black project, long since shut down, still running a route they can't abandon. But Wade, he stopped trying to explain it. Sometimes when he can't sleep, he pulls out the old CB from storage. He turns the dial real slow, listens for dead air. And every now and then, when the night's real quiet, he swears he hears an engine humming in the background. Real low. Real close. La Sombra del Diablo, near Laredo, Texas, was one of those stories whispered in the backs of cantinas and on front porches during long, still evenings when the heat clung to your skin like wet gauze. They say it showed up first in the 1960s, on back roads where the scrub brush grows too wild and tall, where radio stations die into static and even the moon forgets to shine. The Devil's Shadow. Taller than any man had a right to be, blacker than the inside of a closed coffin, and it moved without sound, or sometimes with a sound like air being sucked through teeth. Marta Ruiz had never believed in that kind of thing. She was 29, sensible, and the kind of woman who kept a rosary in her glove box, but only out of habit. She worked the late shift at a rural health clinic outside Laredo, mostly routine stuff, late-night fevers, twisted ankles, the occasional kid with a cut needing stitches because his cousin dared him to jump off the roof. The real emergencies got carted to the big hospital in town. Still, her hours were long, and by the time she left work that Tuesday in late September, the night was thick and dry, moonless, the kind that makes your headlights feel like they're cutting through dust rather than darkness. She took FM 1472, known locally as Mines Road, a two-lane stretch of cracked asphalt that wound north of Laredo toward the old industrial park, through empty tracts of ranchland and forgotten fields. It was a shortcut, sure, but one she'd taken 100 times. That night, she rolled the windows down halfway. The air smelled like dry weeds and hot dirt. Then came the thud. It wasn't like hitting an animal. Marta had done that once, clipped a javelina a few years back. That had been violent, meaty. This was different, like she'd hit a wave of cold air so dense it had bones. Her seatbelt snapped tight across her chest, and the steering wheel jerked to the right hard enough to wrench her shoulder. The car's engine stuttered like it was choking on something, and for a moment, the headlights dimmed to a sickly yellow. Then she saw it, standing dead center in the road, maybe 30 feet ahead. A shape, not a man, not really. It was about 7 feet tall, no features, no face. Like someone had cut a figure out of the night itself and placed it there, wrong and swaying slightly, like it didn't quite belong to this world. The shoulders were too high, the arms too long, and the head. If it had a head, it was bent at an angle that hurt just to look at. She couldn't make out eyes or a mouth. It was all shadow and slouch. Then, a flash of high beams in her rearview mirror. Another car approaching from behind. The moment that light touched the road ahead, the figure vanished. Not like it ran off or faded. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, like a slide clicking to the next image in a projector. The car behind her honked, a long, annoyed honk, and she realized she'd come to a dead stop in the middle of the highway. She hit the gas. The engine coughed once, then again, and finally dragged itself forward. The other drivers swerved around her, their red taillights disappearing into the distance like they couldn't get away fast enough. From that night on, Marta's car was never right again. At first, it was little things. The dash lights flickering, the AC blowing hot even with the knob turned all the way to cold. But then came the real problem. Every few nights, usually when she was alone on some unlit road, she'd hear it, the same thud, always the same sound, whether she was moving or parked. She once swore it happened when she was sitting in her driveway, keys still in her hand. Worse, she started to see the shadow. Not always full on, but out of the corner of her eye. It would be standing by a fence post or behind a mesquite tree. Once, she caught a glimpse of it reflected in the glass doors of the clinic lobby just before dawn, standing behind her, impossibly tall and perfectly still. When she turned around, nothing was there. People started noticing something was off about her. Her coworkers said she looked tired, haunted. Her brother joked she had desvelo del diablo, devil's insomnia, and laughed like it was funny. She tried to brush it off, say it was just the stress of the job, long hours, but the truth was, she barely slept anymore. Then came the night she drove out to see her tia Eloisa, who lived in a trailer near the edge of the dry lake bed, north of town. Eloisa was one of those old-school women who believed in mal de ojo and carried salt in her purse. When Marta told her what she'd been seeing, Eloisa didn't laugh. She just poured her a cup of cinnamon coffee and asked questions. "You said it vanished when the lights came?" she asked, peering at her over cracked bifocals. "And the thud? Cold, like water?" Marta nodded. "It's like it's not real, or like it's more real than everything else. I don't know. It feels heavy, like it's pulling something from me." Her aunt said something in a low voice, a prayer maybe, then tapped the wood of the table twice. "That's not just a spirit, Mia. That's a sombra. There are things that don't walk in flesh but in absence. Old things. They live in the places we forget. Dry riverbeds, empty highways, borderlands. You met one, and now it remembers you." She gave Marta a pouch, black cloth with dried herbs and something that smelled like sulfur inside. "Hang this from your mirror and don't look at it again. If you see it, don't stop. Don't acknowledge it. Drive fast and pray it forgets you." Marta tried. God knows she tried. But the next time it came, it didn't stay on the road. It was early October, a few minutes past midnight. She'd stayed late to help with the kid who'd broken his wrist on a four-wheeler. When she finally got into her car, the air felt colder than it should have. The smell was wrong too, not rotten exactly, but metallic, like old coins and wet copper. She started the car. The headlights came on, flickered, then steadied. She was halfway down Mines Road when she heard the thud again, louder this time, like it hit the roof instead of the bumper. The engine didn't stutter. It died, completely. The car coasted for a few feet, then stopped. Everything was silent. She reached for her phone. No signal. That's when she saw it. Not in front of the car, but beside it. Outside her window. It wasn't swaying anymore. It was perfectly still. Closer than ever. So close she could make out the texture of it, if that's what you could call it. Not skin, not cloth. Like looking into a pit of black ink that never stopped moving. Her hand trembled on the steering wheel. Then it moved. Slowly the thing bent down, not crouching, more like folding in on itself until its face, or where a face might have been, was level with hers. Inches from the glass. The window frosted over instantly. The shadow tilted its head, the way a dog does when it's curious. Then, with one long, shivering movement, it raised its hand and placed it against the window. Marta screamed. Light flooded. The road. Headlights from another car coming around the bend, and just like before, the thing was gone. But this time, it left something behind. The glass where it had touched was cracked, 5 long, finger-like fractures etched into the passenger window. When she looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, her hair had gone white above her right temple. Just a streak, but enough. She traded the car 2 days later, burned the pouch, moved back into town. But even now, sometimes when she's home alone, her lights will flicker. Her new car, a reliable Corolla, will make that same thud when she starts it. And on windless nights, she catch the shape of something too tall standing just beyond the fence line, where the street lights don't quite reach. They call it La Sombra del Diablo. But Marta knows better. The devil doesn't cast that shadow. It is the shadow. And once it's touched you, it never really lets go. Jesse Laredo had been driving for 6 hours, the last 3 of them through nothing but oil fields, scrubland, and the occasional dead possum cooking on the asphalt. It was the kind of late August heat that clings to your skin, even with the VIA AC on full blast. The thermometer on his dash flickered between 98 and 101, and he kept telling himself he'd stop at the next Alsups for a Dr. Pepper and a smoke, even though he'd quit 3 months ago. He was heading down to Brownsville to help his cousin move some busted water heaters out of storage. Easy money, nothing special. Just done plenty worse to get by. The sun had dipped below the horizon about 30 minutes before he crossed into Zapata County. That's when the fog started rolling in. At first, it was thin, a little shimmer over the 2-lane blacktop. But by the time he hit the stretch near Falcon Lake, it was like driving through wet cotton. His headlights didn't cut through it so much as bounce off, casting a pale yellowish cone in front of his truck. There weren't any other cars around, just the occasional rusted barbed wire fence and the thick, mesquite trees leaning in like old men with secrets. He had the radio off. He liked the silence when he drove at night. It reminded him of when his dad used to take him out spotlighting deer, not to shoot, just to look, he said. The stillness out there was a kind of holiness. But tonight, something felt different. The silence wasn't peaceful. It pressed in on him, dense and expectant, like the air before a THUNDERCLAP. It was around 9:42 p.m. when he saw the man. He was standing, or trying to, near mile marker 716, just a shape at first. Jesse thought it might have been a trash bag caught on some roadside wire, but as he crept closer, his high beams caught it. A man, thin, dressed in something pale that might have once been a shirt, though it was soaked through with some dark fluid and hanging in shreds. His skin looked wrong, pale, not like a white man's, more like paper left out in the rain. He was barefoot, with long, dusty feet planted awkwardly on the shoulder of the road. Jesse tapped the brakes and pulled over, his truck idling with a low rumble. The man turned his head, slow and jerky, like it took effort. Jesse rolled his window down halfway and leaned out. "Hey, you all right? You need help?" That's when the man took a step forward, his legs bent the wrong way. Not sideways, like someone with a broken hip, but backwards, like the joints were reversed. There were no knees, just a grotesque length of thigh connecting straight down to the shin, which buckled unnaturally under his weight. Each step looked like it should have brought him down screaming, but he just kept limping forward in a steady, twitching rhythm. The tendons in his legs moved like strings being yanked inexpertly by some invisible puppeteer. His feet didn't so much walk as slap the gravel, toes curling backward with each impact. Jesse felt his breath freeze. Something in the primitive part of his brain, the same part that told early man to run from fires and snakes, screamed go now. But he didn't. He couldn't, not yet. The man got close enough for Jesse to see his face in the headlights. The nose was flattened, like it had been broken and never reset. His eyes were milk white, the pupils barely visible pinpricks. His mouth hung open slightly, and when he spoke, it was like hearing wind come through a cracked window. "It hurts to stand," the man whispered. Then he was gone, not walked away, not limped off, just gone. 1 second there, the next, a puff of fog. Jesse blinked and slammed his truck into park, stepping out onto the gravel shoulder with his boots crunching the rocks. The air was heavy and cold, unnatural for South Texas in late summer. He called out, "Hey, where'd you go?" Nothing. Just the rustle of mesquite leaves in a breeze that hadn't been there a minute before. He turned, slowly scanning the brush. He could see a few old fence posts, the wire long since rusted off. Beyond that, scrubland, thick, tangled, impossible to walk through without a machete. No way the guy could have gone in there. Not with legs like that, but he was gone. Jesse stood there for a long moment, until the hairs on his arms prickled and a low buzzing filled his ears, like a fly, but deeper. Subsonic. He shook it off, climbed back into his truck, and locked the doors. He drove the rest of the way into Zapata, without seeing another soul. Didn't stop for gas. Didn't get his Dr. Pepper. Just kept going, hands tight on the wheel, knuckles pale-dot. It wasn't until the next day that he said anything. He was unloading water heaters with his cousin, Leo, in a stifling garage behind a Dollar General when he mentioned it. Like someone mentioning a weird dream. There was this guy on the side of the road last night, Jesse said, adjusting his grip on the dolly. Legs were all screwed up, bent backwards. Said it hurt to stand. Leo froze. You saw him? On 83? Yeah, near the lake. You know about that? Leo didn't answer right away. He dropped his end of the heater and pulled out his phone. Opened a picture. You mean this stretch? Jesse looked. It was a screenshot from Google Maps, a patch of Highway 83 just south of Zapata, near a culvert that drained into the lake. The shoulder was cracked and overgrown, and there was a faint dark stain on the gravel. Yeah, right about there. Leo nodded slowly. You ever heard of the Zapata kneeler? The what? That's what people call him. Old story. My Tio Raymond used to talk about him. Said he was some poor bastard who got hit by a delivery truck back in the 50s. Driver swerved to avoid a deer, flipped a guy at the knees, tore him clean off. He didn't die right away. Tried to crawl for help. They found him 3 days. Later, about 30 yards from the road, died kneeling. Bones sticking out like white branches. Jesse didn't say anything. He just felt that buzz again, low and behind his ears. He shows up sometimes, Leo went on. Always the same. Walking kinda, limping, legs all wrong. Some say he's looking for help. Others say he doesn't know he's dead. They say if you stop, he marks you. Jesse looked up. Marks you? Leo shrugged. I dunno. Stuff happens. Tires blow out. You get sick? Pets die. People vanish. Sometimes folks say they start seeing him in other places. Gas station windows. Bathroom mirrors. That kind of thing. Jesse laughed, but it was forced. Sounds like bullshit, man. Yeah, Leo said. Most stories are. But that night, back at his motel, Jesse dreamed of the man again. Only this time he wasn't. On the side of the road. He was standing in the motel's hallway, just past the ice machine. His legs moved like twigs bending in a fire. Jesse couldn't scream, couldn't move. The man raised his hand and pointed at Jesse's knees. It hurts to stand. He whispered again. When Jesse woke up, his sheets were wet. Not with sweat, with blood. A thin line had been cut into the top of each knee, like a scalpel had traced a smile there. The doctor said it might be self-harm. Sleepwalking, maybe. Stress. But Jesse knew better. He left Zapata the next day and drove straight through to Laredo, then north. Didn't stop, didn't eat. Every time he blinked, he saw those backwards legs, the way they bent and cracked and pulled against the earth. He kept thinking he'd see the man in his rear view, just behind the truck bed. 2 weeks later, Leo stopped answering texts. His cousin's girlfriend said he went out to the culvert one night, said he wanted to see something. They never found him. Just his shoes, placed neatly by the shoulder of the road. That stretch of Highway 83 is still there. The mesquite trees. Still leaning close. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick, people say they see him. The man with no knees, limping along the edge. Head low, eyes white, whispering his pain to the dark dot, and if you stop, he might just follow you home. South of McAllen, the land stretches out like an old scar, cracked, dry, and bitter under the weight of years. The sun cooks everything it touches, but at night, the cold creeps in sharp and mean, especially along the border fence. That wall, steel and soulless, runs like a spine through the brush country, dividing one world from another, but never quite keeping the things out that aren't supposed to exist in either dot. It started late one Saturday. Miguel had stolen a cooler of beer from his uncle's garage and borrowed his cousin's old Chevy, the one with the rusted tailgate and no working radio. Him, Jordan, Tasha, and Eric took off from a gas station in Mission, all of them 17, buzzed on warm Bud Light and the thrill of doing something they shouldn't. Miguel knew a dirt road that dead-ended a couple miles short of the Rio Grande, right along a bend in the new stretch of border fence. The government had been putting it up in sections for years, sometimes abandoning half-finished pieces when funding dried up or politics shifted. This spot, though, it was done. Tall slats, solid steel, 15 feet high with rust creeping in at the base where the desert tried to swallow it whole. Beyond that was just dark brush and the whispers of water if you listened long enough. They parked in a little turnout off the road, behind some mesquite, far enough from any patrol lights. Tasha rolled a joint on the hood of the truck while Jordan took long exposure photos on his Canon, pretending it was for his college portfolio even though he knew damn well none of them were getting out of South Texas anytime soon. Eric, quiet as ever, leaned against the fender with his hood up, sipping beer and staring down the fence like it owed him something. At first, it was just about the view. The fence shimmered in the moonlight, every bar casting a long shadow in the dirt. The wind kicked up dust that glowed pale and powdery. Jordan tried to photograph it, but the lens kept fogging, even though the night wasn't that cold. Tasha wandered toward the fence with the joint in her fingers, daring Eric to touch it. "Bet it's hot-wired," she laughed. He didn't answer, just followed her, boots crunching in the scrub. Miguel stayed back at the truck, cracking another beer and scrolling through his phone, trying not to look up at the emptiness that stretched out all around them. That's when Tasha screamed. It wasn't a dramatic scream, more like a sharp gasp cut short, enough to make Miguel drop his beer and bolt forward. By the time he got to them, Jordan was already there, shining his phone flashlight on the spot where she stood. At first, it looked like nothing, just steel bars, dirt, brush. Then Miguel saw the blood. It was smeared up and down one section of the fence, thick and dark and fresh. It wasn't dripping from anywhere. It had already started to cake in places, dried in streaks like someone had thrown buckets of it from both sides. The ground was splattered, the nearby brush stained. In one spot, there were two long vertical smears that looked like arms had been dragged down from where the top of the fence would be. There was no body, no meat, just blood. Too much of it to make sense. Jordan kept repeating, "That's a lot, man. That's a lot," while he took pictures with shaking hands. Tasha backed away slowly, clutching Eric's arm. Eric just stared up at the top of the fence, his jaw clenched, like he was trying to understand how something could get up there and bleed that much. They ran, like anyone would. Back to the truck, full sprint, gravel flying, no one speaking. Miguel fumbled the keys so bad he dropped them twice. When the headlights came on, every one of them froze. Bloody handprints. They were everywhere. On the windows, the hood, the doors. Sticky smears like someone had circled the truck while they were gone, pressing their hands against the glass, dragging their palms across the mirrors. No footprints, no noise. Just those prints dripping slowly under the headlights. Tasha started crying. Jordan was cursing, taking photos even as his breath hitched. Eric was the only one who moved. He yanked the door open and shouted at Miguel to drive now. They didn't talk on the way back. Not much, anyway. They hit pavement and just kept going, all the way to Jordan's house in Palmview. His parents were gone for the weekend. They parked the truck in the garage and wiped it down with shop rags and bleach. It didn't help. The stains were too deep. In the daylight, they looked brown like rust or old oil. But they knew what they'd seen. The next day, Eric didn't answer texts. Jordan tried to call, then went by his house. His mom said he'd left that morning, said something about checking something near the levee. Never came back. When? The cops found his shoes by the fence 3 days later, sitting side by side in the dirt. They said it was probably a coyote or a cartel thing. That was the answer for everything out there. Animals or drugs. Convenient answers. Cheap lies, but Jordan showed the photos to a Border Patrol agent he knew, a guy named Reyes who used to be a neighbor. Reyes didn't say much. Just flipped through the pictures real slow, then asked where they were taken. When Jordan told him, the agent got real quiet. You didn't see anything? He asked. No, just blood. Reyes nodded and handed the phone back. Don't go back there. Ever. That stretch ... it's wrong. Always has been. Miguel started sleeping with a baseball bat next to his bed. Tasha stopped going to school altogether. She told Miguel once, during a rare phone call, that she kept dreaming of the fence, of something on it, moving like a spider, clinging sideways, its arms too long, its head tilted backwards, bleeding in reverse. Like it wasn't leaking, but drinking the blood back in. She'd wake up with her ears ringing and her nose bleeding. Miguel didn't believe in much, but he knew fear when he felt it. Every time he passed near the fence, even from the highway, his chest tightened. Sometimes he thought he saw something in the corner of his eye. A shadow crouched on the steel. Waiting. One night, a few weeks later, he went back. Not because he wanted to. He just couldn't stop thinking about it. He drove alone, same truck. Same road, same dirt turnoff. The air was dead still. No wind. No bugs. Just silence and moonlight. The blood was gone. But something else was there. The fence slats had deep scratches now. Long, crisscrossing grooves like something had climbed. Up and down 100 times. Miguel walked closer, phone light flickering, his breath catching in his throat. When he looked up, when he really looked, he saw eyes. Just 2 of them, set wide apart, too high off the ground. Watching him through the slats, not blinking. Weren't human eyes. They were wet and black, with a red shimmer beneath like old brake lights. And they didn't move when he did. They just watched. He ran. No one believed him. Not even Tasha. Jordan moved to Austin a month later, never answered texts after that. They all left in their own way. The fence remained, but sometimes you still hear about it. Some drunk ranch hand claims he saw a skinless coyote crawl up the bars like a monkey. A Border Patrol drone catches something on thermal, heat with no shape, bleeding cold. Locals whisper about the bleeder by the river. Some say it's a ghost. Others say it's something else, something older. A thing the fence tried to keep out, but ended up trapping. And every so often, someone disappears. They always find the shoes. Neat, side by side, facing the fence. They say there's nothing much out near Eagle Pass but heat and border dust, prickly pear, and long, empty stretches of land where silence sits heavy like a wet rag on your neck. But those who've lived out that way long enough know better. They know the desert isn't quiet, it's just patient, it waits. And sometimes it remembers. Raymond Medina had lived in Eagle Pass his whole life. Retired from his job sweeping the floors of Zavala Middle School, he spent most of his days under a ceiling fan, sipping cold beers and talking to himself. Folks in town said he'd always been a bit strange, even before the tunnel thing. But after that night with his grandson, something inside him seemed ... misplaced. Like a man walking around with his bones out of order. It started one evening in late August. One of those dry, electric nights when the sky looks bruised and swollen. Raymond's daughter had dropped off her kid Shadowy for the weekend. Just turned 11, sharp-eyed and too curious for his own good. The boy liked to explore, liked old maps and places nobody went to anymore. He kept a little green notebook full of places he'd heard whispers about: dried-up wells, shuttered churches, a rusted-out bridge west of Quamato folks said bled red water when it rained. That kind of thing. He had Tunnel 34 circled in that notebook, big red ink around it like a warning or a dare dot. It wasn't a tunnel in the usual sense. It was a maintenance corridor, concrete and steel, once meant for irrigation engineers back when the Eagle Pass canals were still functional. Back in the 60s and early 70s, they'd dig these narrow passages under the dry washes and culverts to run pipes and check valves. Most of them caved in or got sealed off. But Tunnel 34 never did. Locals whispered about it. Teenagers dared each other to find it, go inside, count to 100. That sort of thing. But Tunnel 34 wasn't easy to find. It sat about 8 miles outside of town, where the mesquite got thicker and the soil turned black like burned meat. No signs, no fences. Just a sloping embankment that led down to a concrete mouth half hidden by brush and heat haze. No one's sure why it never got filled in, and no one wanted to be the one who went in deep enough to find out, except Shadowy. The boy had begged Raymond for days, showing him the pages he'd printed out from old county survey maps, notes he'd scribbled from forums, even stories clipped from the Eagle Pass Sentinel. He asked his abuelo like kids ask about dinosaurs, with awe and obsession. At first, Raymond had told him no. He said it was too dangerous, too far, too hot. But something in the boy's voice that night, a kind of need, a desperation to uncover something hidden, wore the old man down. So just before sunset, they drove out in Raymond's ancient Dodge pickup. No GPS, no phones. Just a flashlight, 2 bottles of water, and Jamie's little notebook. They parked in a clearing and walked the rest of the way through brittle grass and over rust-colored rocks, boots crunching in the silence. Raymond said the air got strange the closer they got, heavier, like breathing through wet wool. Shadowy found the entrance first. He called it a mouth without a throat. They went in. Nobody knows how long they were gone. Maybe an hour, maybe more. When Raymond came back, he was alone. A rancher found him wandering the highway barefoot, his clothes blackened like he'd walked through fire. His skin was covered in soot, fine like cigarette ash. He was muttering something under his breath, repeating it. The walls breathe, they breathe, they breathe. He wouldn't stop saying it. Sheriff Ortega said he'd never seen Raymond look that scared. And he'd seen the man cry at 3 funerals and get knifed at a flea market brawl in 1992 without flinching. But now, he was shaking like he had ice in his veins. Wouldn't look anyone in the eye. He just kept whispering about the walls, about breathing, about mouths that had no end. The search lasted 3 days. Border Patrol, local PD, volunteers. Dogs couldn't catch a scent. Shadowy was gone, like smoke through a sieve. Then came the storm. A freak thunderstorm rolled through, sharp and sudden, blowing in from Del Rio like it had a score to settle. Lightning split the dry sky in 1,000 directions. Flash floods tore through the lowlands. 2 days after Raymond came back, the tunnel entrance, what little of it there was, collapsed. A rock slide nobody could explain buried it completely. Geologists said erosion. Locals said otherwise. Here's the thing no one talks about. 2 other people disappeared in that area in the 70s. A surveyor named Dwight Caldwell and a woman named Elena Ruiz, who was part of a water conservation team. Both vanished during inspections of the irrigation tunnels. No bodies. Just tool bags left behind and radios still hissing static. One of the old workers at the time, name of Arturo Benavides, wrote in his retirement journal that he'd seen red light inside the tunnel like blood through skin. That journal got tossed in the county archive. No one read it until after what happened with Raymond and Jamie Dot, and then there's what happened to Raymond after. They took him to Maverick County Hospital. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep unless the lights were on and the TV volume was turned up loud. One of the orderlies swore he found Raymond standing in the corner of his room at 3:14 a.m., scratching at the wall with both hands like he was trying to dig into it, whispering, "It's soft, it's breathing again." His fingernails were bloody. The wall had tiny marks, not deep, but there were lines, like something had pulsed behind the plaster. The orderly quit the next day, moved to El Paso, refused to speak about it again. By December, Raymond was catatonic. Some say he's still in a facility down in Laredo, but others whisper he was transferred quietly to a state hospital near Galveston, where they keep the ones who aren't sick. Just wrong. What really happened in Tunnel 34? Depends who you ask. Some say it's an old military site, a Cold War project gone sour, radiation or chemicals that soaked into the ground. Others think it's older than the tunnels themselves, that the engineers dug too deep into something that was already there, something buried under layers of desert and time, something not meant to be found. There's an old Mexican folktale about La Cueva del Hambre, the Cave of Hunger, a place that devours memory and flesh. Maybe Tunnel 34 is part of that. Maybe the desert just decided to make one of its stories. True, but the thing that sticks with me, the part that keeps me up sometimes, even now, is what Jamie wrote in that notebook of his. The last entry, dated the night before he disappeared. Written in that shaky, excited handwriting only kids have when they think they're about to find something incredible. It said, "I heard it whisper. It's not a tunnel. It's a lung." And below that, scribbled in smaller letters like a secret, "If it breathes, that means it's alive." No one's been back to Tunnel 34. You can't even find it now. The whole area is overgrown, like the earth grew a scar and doesn't want to remember how it got there. But sometimes, after the rain, locals say they hear things near the old wash, faint sounds like air being sucked through broken teeth. And if you press your ear to the ground, you might, just for a second, feel something shift beneath you, like lungs filling, like something remembering you and breathing you in. Alejandra never thought much of Loop 20, the stretch of Texas highway wrapped around the outskirts of Laredo like a loose belt, frayed and forgotten. She'd driven it 100 times, sometimes during blistering daylight when the heat shimmered off the pavement, sometimes at night when the shadows stretched out too long and the air smelled like burning rubber and mesquite. But she never feared it. It was just asphalt. Just a way home after her evening shift at the hospital. That was until the night the tires whispered her name. She'd picked up a double shift at Laredo Medical Center, and by the time she clocked out, it was nearly 2:30 a.m. Her feet throbbed, her back ached, and her eyes itched with fatigue. But she was used to it. She tossed her duffel into the back seat of her aging Toyota Corolla, slid behind the wheel, and plugged in her phone. A playlist full of loud reggaeton, thumping bass, and bright horns helped drown the silence. That was her thing, music. Loud enough to keep the weariness at bay, to keep the road from swallowing her whole. The first half of the drive was uneventful. The highway was empty, the way it usually was at that hour. The occasional pair of headlights would flash by in the opposite lane, but otherwise it was just her and a dry wind. She passed the truck stop with the broken sign and the skeletal remains of a burned-out Shell station. Then the billboard. El Diablo is real, repent now. Its weathered paint flaking under the moonlight. A mile or so later, her speakers began to crackle. At first, she thought it was just the O chord. She jiggled it with one hand while staring with the other, but the distortion only got worse. The music hiccuped, then stopped entirely. Static took its place. Alejandra sighed and reached for the phone to restart the playlist, but it was already playing. Volume was up. Bars were full. No sign of trouble. The static turned sharper, not white noise. More like movement.
Layers of sound, brushing.
Against each other like dry leaves in wind. She leaned closer. That was when she heard it. Alejandra, barely audible. A whisper. A breath in her ear. She flinched, looked to the back seat. Empty. The rear view showed nothing but highway. Again. Alejandra. This time she froze. The voice wasn't coming from the speakers. It was deeper, closer, beneath her. She instinctively tapped the brake, slowing down to 60, then 50. Her hands trembled slightly on the wheel. The voice came again, more insistent, not loud, but certain. Intimate. Alejandra. She could hear it now, clearer, not just a whisper, but several voices. Male, female, young, old. Some murmuring nonsense. Some laughing, some crying. But one thread ran through them all, her name. Spoken again and again, in fragments, from below. From the tires the car began to shake. Not violently, just enough to feel it in the seat. A shudder, like when a gust of wind hits a trailer. But there was no wind. She yanked the wheel and took the nearest exit, a looping off-ramp that curved into a feeder, road lined with mesquite scrub and chain-link fences. Her hazard lights blinked as she coasted to a stop near an abandoned Whataburger, its windows boarded up and its sign half missing. She climbed out of the car and stood in the hot, dry night, sweat already beading on her brow despite the hour. The sound of the whispers was gone, replaced by the chirp of insects and the distant hum of transformers. She walked around the car, then stopped. All four tires sagged against the rims. Flat. Not just flat, mangled. The rubber was torn outward, as if something had exploded from the inside. Shredded in ribbons, the steel belts exposed and twisted. She crouched down beside the rear driver's side wheel and stared. The edges weren't clean, they were jagged. And then she saw it, a crescent-shaped indentation along the inside wall. Then another, and another. Like bite marks, her blood turned cold, teeth marks. From the inside, she stumbled back and dropped. Her phone trying to dial 911. Her voice cracked as she gave her location to the dispatcher. The operator stayed on the line with her until a sheriff's deputy arrived 30 minutes later. Her car sitting dead on the feeder road with the flashing lights painting the darkness red and blue. The deputy was a tall man, young but weathered, like someone who'd seen a few too many things out in the brush. He bent down to inspect the tires, then called in another deputy. Then crime scene photos were taken. Rubber samples were bagged. Alejandra sat on the curb, wrapped in a blanket someone had fetched from their cruiser. By 5 a.m., even the cops were baffled. The tires had clearly not been slashed by any conventional tool. The tears originated from within, as if something inside the tires had expanded and clawed or bitten its way out. There were bite marks. A forensic tech confirmed it. No animal tracks nearby. No signs of tampering. Just shredded rubber and a woman who heard voices from her wheels. She took a cab home, refusing the offer of a tow truck or rental. She didn't want to be near the car again, not that morning. Not ever. For the next week, she took the bus to work. She didn't sleep. Much. Couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the whisper again, soft, slow, deliberate. Alejandra. She began to feel it even when she was awake, like someone brushing the back of her neck, a pressure in her ears. a presence under her feet. 3 days later, she got a call from the sheriff's department. "Miss Valdez? We finished processing your vehicle. What did you find?" The man paused, then cleared his throat. "You said you thought." "The sound was coming from the tires, right?" "Yes. Well, we found something. Something lodged inside the front passenger side wheel well. We missed it the first time. Thought it was part of the tire tread. But what?" "It's a tooth, Miss Valdez. Human." She didn't respond. "We're sending it to a lab in Austin, but it's old. Real old. Worn down like something that's been buried a long time." Alejandra hung up without saying goodbye. That night, she didn't sleep at all. The dream started the next day. Long roads under moonlight. Her car coasting silently down Loop 20, her fingers stuck to the wheel. Her feet melting into the floorboard. Something slithering through the axle. Faces pressing against the windshield from the inside. She tried to explain it to a friend. He told her about local stories, old trucker tales. About the stretch of Loop 20 near the old quarry where people reported strange vibrations in there. Vehicles where electronics went haywire. One man said he saw eyes in the road. Another claimed a hitchhiker he picked up dissolved into black smoke halfway down the ramp to Mines Road. She tried to laugh it off. Then the voices returned. Not in the car. In her apartment. In the walls. Coming from the air vents, from under the sink, from the garbage disposal when it wasn't running. Always whispering her name. Always beneath her. One night, she caught herself sleepwalking, standing barefoot in the middle of the street, staring toward the on-ramp to Loop 20, keys in her hand, eyes wide open but unseeing. She moved out a week later. Left Laredo entirely. Took a job in Amarillo. Bought a new car. But sometimes, when she's on a highway alone, she turns down the radio. Just for a second. Just to check. And once, just outside of Tulia, she heard it again. A whisper, low and sweet and coiling up from the floorboards. Alejandra. When she pulled over, one of the tires was warm to the touch. Not from friction. Too warm, as if something. Inside it had a pulse. She doesn't listen to music when she drives anymore. Now she drives in silence, listening, waiting. Phantom mile marker 191I1. Oh, west of Sierra Blanca, it was a dry night. The kind of night that pressed the weight of the desert down on your lungs, where the only movement came from bugs skittering across the cracked asphalt, and the heat still rising off the pavement like a ghost of the sun. Wes Halcomb had been driving westbound on I-10 for close to 6 hours, hauling a load of machine parts from El Paso to Los Angeles. He was no rookie 27 years on the road, most of it spent staring down the desolate veins of the Texas highway system with nothing but static on the radio and the low hum of his own thoughts. Wes had heard the stories. Every trucker who ran this stretch had. Somewhere west of Sierra Blanca, where the land turns lunar and the sky feels too big for the earth beneath it, there was supposed to be a phantom mile marker 191 specifically. Problem was, the state maps didn't list a 191. The markers jumped from 190 to 192 clean. But more than a few men swore they'd seen it glowing faintly in the dark, a pale blue shimmer like it was lit from the inside. Some said it only appeared past midnight. Some said you had to be alone with the CB off and the air dead quiet. Others figured it showed up only if you were tired enough to almost fall asleep with your eyes open. Wes had always chalked it up to long-haul delirium. The road played tricks, especially out there where the radio died for miles and your cell turned into a useless brick. But that night, he'd felt something different. Not fear, not yet. Just unease like the darkness had weight to it, a silent Pressure sitting just behind the horizon. His rig rolled past the 190 marker at 12:41 a.m. He glanced at the dash clock without thinking. No traffic on either side. Just the endless black ribbon of I-10 ahead, the occasional reflectors on the road winking at him like dying stars. Then, maybe 3 minutes later, he saw a mile marker 191. It looked wrong. Taller than it should have. Thin, weathered, pitted, but the numbers were clear. Faintly blue, like the glow from an old CRT screen, even though there weren't any lights nearby. No reason for it to glow. It passed by his window in a blink, and as it did, a sharp snap popped through his radio, a single crackle like a speaker being unplugged, and then silence. No static, just nothing. Wes twisted the knob, flipped through AM and FM, even tried the weather band. Dead air across the board. A chill crawled up his spine, and not just because of the radio. He felt lighter somehow, as if gravity had shifted. Ever so slightly. He sat up straighter, heart picking up a beat. That mile marker wasn't supposed to be there. And his headlights were acting strange, too, throwing a yellow cast that looked hazy, like driving through smoke. Then, 5 minutes later, he saw the same sign again, mile marker 191. Wes's hands tightened on the wheel. No way, he muttered. He slowed down, squinting into the dark. The land around him was flat, featureless, just sparse creosote bushes and ridges of jagged rock, the kind that turned black at night and seemed to vanish until your lights hit them. He tapped the brakes. His odometer hadn't changed much. Just a few tenths of a mile. He drove on, eyes scanning every inch of the shoulder and ditch. And then, not 3 minutes later, the sign again, mile marker 191. This time, he stopped. Hazards blinking against the silence, he climbed down from the cab and stepped into the night. The moment his boots hit the asphalt, the world felt off. The silence wasn't natural. It wasn't just quiet, it was total. No wind, no chirp of insects, not even the ticking sound of his engine cooling. Just a void. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on steel, but there wasn't a cloud in sight. Wes walked toward the marker. It stood about 30 feet from where he'd stopped. Closer now, he could see the numbers weren't printed, they looked burned into the surface. Deep, uneven grooves that flickered in that faint, impossible blue. He touched it. It was cold. Too cold for metal that had been sitting in the desert all day. He jerked his hand back and turned toward his truck, intending to get back in, shake off the nerves, maybe radio dispatch. But then he saw it across the opposite side of the road, parked half in the dirt, half on the shoulder, a car. Old, rusted out. Looked like a 70s model Plymouth Valiant. The sort of thing that should have, long ago, been flattened into scrap. The headlights were gone. One tire had crumbled completely. The paint was bubbled and flaked down to primer. But the strangest thing was that the windshield was intact. And behind it, Wes saw the driver. He stood frozen, his breath caught in his chest. The man inside wasn't just dead, he was mummified. Skin like leather, cheeks sunk deep against the bone. Mouth frozen half open, eyes dry and wide, like he died in the middle of a scream. Both hands still clutching the wheel. Knuckles bone white. Wes stepped closer, legs stiff, mind screaming to get back in the cab and leave, but his boots kept moving. Something compelled him forward, a need to look. To see. He reached the driver's side door and peered in. The car's interior was covered in dust and sand, like it had been sitting there for decades. A dry, stale smell leaked out the cracks. He could see the driver's wallet on the seat, a stack of Polaroids, cracked leather seats. Dashboard warped from sun. And then the eyes turned. Wes stumbled back, falling to the pavement. The corpse's head had tilted just slightly. The jaw twitched. Those dry, shriveled eyes locked on his. He scrambled up, ran back across the road, heart hammering so loud it drowned out everything else. He didn't look back until he was climbing. Into the truck dot when he slammed the door shut, the radio came alive again. Full volume. Some talk show out of Phoenix, the host's voice babbling about politics and the border. He didn't wait. He floored it. Got the hell out of there, not stopping again until he hit Van Horn 2 hours later. He parked behind a Love's. Shaking, face pale. He slept with the cab light on that night. The next morning, he checked the route. His log showed no anomaly. He'd driven 57 miles in just under 3 hours. The odometer backed that up. But his dash cam, the one he'd wired in just last year, showed a 2-minute gap around the time he passed the first 191 marker. Just static. Then it came back on with him already driving past the third. Wes reported it to dispatch. Told him everything. They laughed. Said he was just tired. But 3 weeks later, another driver from the same company, Marvin Dell, disappeared along that same stretch. His last known location pings just west of Sierra Blanca. They found his rig idling on the shoulder, driver's side door open, headlights still on. No sign of Marvin. No blood. No prints. No damage. Just ... And the strange part? The GPS log for his truck showed him passing the same point 3 times in 10 minutes. Wes hasn't driven I-10 since. He retired a year after that night, bought a little place in Kerrville with thick curtains and a dog that growls at open roads. He keeps to himself, drinks too much. Sometimes he dreams of blue light and hollow eyes, of a car rusting into the earth with someone inside still watching. They say the desert doesn't forget, and neither does. Mile marker 191. The first time I heard about the crying thing on Old Military Highway, I was sitting in a booth at the back of La Estrella, a greasy little diner off FM 511 just outside Brownsville. The waitress, a chain smoker named Marlene who looked like she hadn't slept since the Bush administration, brought me my coffee and said it real casual, like the way locals sometimes do when they're testing an outsider. "You hear anything strange out there last night? Like a baby crying?" I looked up from my notebook, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't smiling. "Don't worry," she said, lighting another cigarette and glancing toward the window. "It always stops when you get close." I'd driven in late the night before, headlights cutting through the swaying cane fields like thin swords, that hot coastal wind pushing against the car like it didn't want me there. I'd taken Old Military because the highway had been closed for construction just north of town. My GPS warned me twice not to take that detour, but I was too tired to think much of it. It was just a road. A cracked, narrow 2-lane with no shoulder, no streetlights, and the kind of dark that feels like it's crawling into your lungs. That night, about a mile before I reached the turnoff toward the motel, I thought I heard something. The radio was off, windows rolled up, but I swore I caught it, just a whisper of sound through the vents. A baby, crying. At first I thought maybe someone had left a radio on in the cane fields, or maybe I was imagining it after a long drive. But it wasn't like any baby I'd heard before. It was thin and warbly, like it didn't have enough breath in its chest. A dry, cracking wail, like someone had shoved gravel down its throat. I slowed, rolled down the window, and it stopped. Didn't think much of it until Marlene brought it up the next morning. "That ain't no baby," she said, flicking her ash into the empty sugar holder. "You pull over to help, that's when it gets you. You stay in your car, you're fine, mostly." She gave me a sideways glance. "You're not from here, huh?" "No," I said. "I'm a writer. True crime, mostly. But sometimes I cover the strange stuff." I didn't usually admit that part out loud. But something about her felt like she already knew. She nodded like that made sense. Well, whatever you're doing, don't go chasing that thing. I know a girl who saw it. She don't talk much anymore. Just sits on her porch, watching the road like she's waiting for something to come back. I should have left it there. Paid my bill, got in the car, and gone back to San Antonio. But and single quotes T-dot the next day, I started asking around. Brownsville's not a big place, not when you get away from the college kids and the border traffic. The people who live out there, off the old highways and farm roads, they've been there a long time. Families tied to land, old Catholic superstitions, stories passed down like family recipes. And they all had something to say about the crying thing. One woman at a flea market told me her brother used to race dirt bikes out in the fields behind old military. Swore he found a pile of bones once, real small, wrapped in moldy blue cloth like a blanket. He called the cops, she said, but they never came. Just told him not to mess around out there anymore. That was 20 years ago. Another man, a gas station owner, told me it was La Llorona. I didn't believe that too easy, too well known. But what he said next stuck with me. Whatever it is, it drags something with it. Like a sack or a bundle. And it ain't human. Got arms too long, legs like they're broken backwards. And it smells. God, the smell like wet dog and rot. If you hear it crying, don't look. Just drive. By the third day, I'd found the girl Marlene mentioned. Her name was Elena Guerra, and she lived in a trailer at the edge of an old orchard about 2 miles off Old Military. Her mother let me in. She don't talk, she warned. But she show you. Elena looked about 22, though. Her eyes were older, haunted. She didn't say a word when I sat down across from her, just stared at me until I asked what she saw. Then she got up and went to her room, came back with a child's drawing in crayon black, blue and red. It showed a stick figure curled up in the dirt, something long and thin crawling on all fours beside it. The thing had no face, just a smear of red where a mouth should be, and long hair dragging behind it like it was stitched to its back. Left that drawing in my motel room and drove straight to the sheriff's department. A man named Cruz sat behind the desk, boots. Propped up, eyes red like he hadn't slept in days. When I asked about the cries on Old Military, he didn't even blink. We don't go out there after dark, he said. And neither should you. What is it? I asked. He leaned forward, dropped his boots. We think it's left over from the base. Old Army land way back. Some of it was used for experiments in the 50s. Chemical stuff. You know how it is. No records, no accountability. But the locals, they think it's something else. Something older. Older than what? He didn't answer. That night, against all better judgment, I went back. I parked just off the shoulder around midnight, killed the engine. Crickets chirped in waves and the cane rustled like it was breathing. Hot wind. I rolled down the window. Waited. At first, nothing. Then I heard it. Just as thin and broken as before. A baby crying. I stepped out of the car. Every part of me screamed to get back in, but I couldn't. I followed the sound, flashlight in hand, crunching through dead grass and brittle stalks. It was like the air got thicker the farther I walked, like something was pushing back. I came to a clearing. Dirt flattened by something big that had moved through recently. I scanned with the light and froze. It was there. Not a baby. It was crawling toward me, slow and twitchy, like a spider learning to walk. Its arms were too long, legs bent sideways like a dog hit by a car. It had no face. Just skin stretched over a skull too narrow and a slit where the mouth should have been, open and whimpering. Behind it dragged a bundle of rags. No, not rags. It was a baby blanket, and inside it was something round and wet like a head. I didn't want to see more. I turned and ran. The sound it made changed shrill and angry like a cat in a blender. I didn't look back. Got to the car, slammed the door, started the engine, and peeled off so fast I fishtailed into the opposite lane. The thing didn't chase me. But I could still hear it, even a mile down the road, crying. When I got back to the motel, the manager handed me a note. "Somebody left this for you?" It was a folded sheet of paper with 4 words. "It knows you looked. I didn't sleep." I left the next morning. Drove 12 hours straight, didn't stop once. But even now, back in my apartment in San Antonio, I can hear it sometimes, in the static between radio stations. In the hum of the AC vent, that thin, broken cry. And I swear last night I smelled a rot and wet dog. I've stopped answering my phone. Emails go unread. I haven't written anything since. Because when I dream, it's always the same. I'm back on Old Military, alone in the cane fields, and something's crawling toward me, dragging that bundle behind it, just a whisper of sound ahead of it. A cry, just out of sight, and I know when it gets here, I won't wake up. South of Presidio, the desert doesn't sleep. The land is made of silence and heat, broken only by the far-off wails of coyotes or the creak of dry wind through the barbed wire fences. The road out of town, Highway 67, cuts like a knife through that empty, breathless country, running south to the Rio Grande and the ghost town of Ruidosa beyond it. You could drive it for an hour and not see another soul, just dust, mesquite scrub, the occasional dead javelina bloated in the heat. It was out there. They said that people saw the dog. They called it El Perro Oscuro. The dark dog. The name. Passed quietly between gas station clerks and ranch hands, whispered like a dare. Always at night, always alone. Some said it was the devil's dog. Others figured it for a spirit, something old and left behind from before fences, before roads, before even the native tribes. But everyone agreed on one thing: it was real. I didn't believe any of it, of course, not at first. My name's Tomas Herrera. I'm a mechanic in Alpine, about an hour north of Presidio. I've worked on just about every pickup and a TV within. 50 miles, and I'd heard the stories since I was a kid. We'd sit out on the porches on hot nights, drinking warm Tecate and listening to the old-timers talk about strange things they'd seen on the ranch trails. Lights that didn't belong. In the sky, cattle torn up with no tracks around them, a woman in a white dress walking down the highway barefoot. But El Perro, that one, always gave me a shiver I didn't want to admit to. The stories were all the same. A black dog, huge, the size of a steer, not running after your vehicle, but with it, pacing like it was keeping time, eyes like embers, tongue lolling, mouth wide like it was grinning. One woman, a nurse who commuted late between Presidio and Marfa, said it ran beside her SUV for 7 miles. She said she tried to speed up, but it stayed right there with her, loping like it wasn't even trying. When she made the sign of the cross, it smiled. Her voice shook when she said that it smiled. Next morning, she found claw marks down the side of her car. Deep gouges, long and curved, like from talons. She doesn't drive at night anymore. Started to believe after what happened to Maria. She was my cousin, worked at the little diner off the main drag in Presidio. She was closing up one night, maybe 11:30, and she had to drive out to Ruidosa to check on her parents. Her mom had called in a panic about something banging on the roof. Said it sounded like hooves, but no animals were in sight. Maria never made it there. The sheriff found her pickup in a ditch halfway to Ruidosa. It hadn't rolled, hadn't flipped, no sign of collision. It just ... Sat there, lights still on, driver's door open. But Maria was gone, not a trace. No blood, no footprints, no tire tracks except her own. Just one thing, claw marks down the side of the truck. And not little scratches, deep gouges through paint and metal like it had been peeled back by a bear. The side mirror was missing too, just snapped off clean. Her folks never found her. She's still officially a missing person, but everyone down there knows. They just know. That got me thinking. Got me reading, listening harder to the stories. Something was happening down that stretch of 67, and it was older than most of us. Cared to imagine. I started asking questions at the cantina in Shafter, at the gas station outside Redford. Most people clammed up or shrugged, pretending they didn't know what I was talking about. But a few, the older ones, had a look in their eyes. That distant, hunted look, like prey remembering the shadow in the grass. One night, I drove it myself. I'd had enough tequila to be brave, but not so much that I couldn't steer straight. Midnight, I rolled out of Presidio in my old '96 Ford, windows down, radio off. The stars were bright enough to see without headlights, but I kept them on anyway. Just me, the hum of the tires and the desert wind. The first few miles, nothing. I passed the old mission ruins, the dry arroyos, the dead cottonwoods. I even laughed a little at myself, expecting some big phantom dog like a campfire story come to life. But then the road curved near a stretch of low hills, and I felt it. The air changed. Not colder, not warmer, just wrong. Like stepping into a room where something terrible had just happened. That silence that feels like it's watching you, and then I saw it. Just past mile marker 42, on the passenger side, it rose from the brush like smoke made solid. Black as coal, thick-furred, eyes like molten glass. It wasn't a dog, not really. The shape was dog-like, yeah. 4 legs, pointed ears, long snout. But the proportions were off. Too long, too low, too massive. Its shoulders came up even with my window, and I swear the thing was grinning. Tongue out, panting like it was enjoying itself that it ran beside me. Not chasing, not attacking, just keeping pace. I was going 65. I sped up, 70, 75. The Ford rattled with the effort, engine whining, but the thing stayed right there. No strain, no noise, just that grin. I glanced at it for half a second too long, and it winked at me. I nearly pissed myself. I did what the nurse did. I made the sign of the cross, right there behind the wheel. My abuela used to make me do it before long trips. I never took it seriously. But when I did it then, the dog's grin widened. Its teeth, God, those teeth. Too many, too long. They didn't look like dog teeth. They looked human. Then, just like that, it veered off into the brush. Didn't slow down, didn't make a sound. Just vanished into the desert, like it had never been there. I pulled over, heart thundering so hard I thought I might black out. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. The night stayed still, but that wrong feeling didn't go away. I drove straight back to Presidio without looking out the windows again. Next morning, I found claw marks down the passenger side. Long, deep, 3 parallel gouges that looked like they'd been carved with blades. That was 3 months ago. I haven't driven that road since, but the stories keep coming. Last week, a Border Patrol agent saw it. Said it loped alongside his truck just outside Candelaria. He thought it was a stray at first, until he noticed it wasn't breathing. It just ran, tongue out, eyes glowing. When he stopped to get a better look, it kept going and disappeared into the brush. The next day, he found his truck door open, and the inside smelled like wet fur and burnt meat. They say El Perro Oscuro doesn't chase, doesn't need to. It watches. It waits. And if it smiles at you, it's already chosen. I believe that now. I live in Alpine still, but I don't go south anymore. Not even to visit my aunt. And when the night falls over the desert and the wind starts to moan through the telephone wires, I swear I can hear it low, steady panting, and the scrape of claws on gravel. If you ever find yourself on Highway 67, south of Presidio, keep your eyes on the road dot and for God's sake, don't smile back. It was the kind of night that bleeds out the color of the desert. Everything a dull, bruised blue beneath the weight of a moonless sky. The wind had settled to a low whisper that slid through the creosote and barbed wire like something with a purpose. Jose Martinez had been working graveyard shifts for nearly 6 years, by then long enough to know when something was off, but not long enough to know what to do when it really, truly was. That night, sometime after 2 a.m., he was driving the long loop back toward Border Patrol Station Echo, nestled somewhere south of Marfa, closer to the Rio Grande than any town out in the dark lungs of West Texas. Echo was small and ugly, built low to the dirt like it was trying not to be seen. Most nights, it felt more like a forgotten outpost than a government facility. A skeleton crew, a few trucks, some cots in the back. He'd never liked it, but that night the dislike had turned to unease. His radio had cut out outside of Lajitas. That wasn't unheard of. There were dead zones where the rock formations just swallowed signal whole, but it stayed dead longer than usual. He tried the sat phone too. Nothing. Dead. Then he tried his truck's horn for the hell of it, and didn't hear a damn thing. That's when he realized the silence wasn't just lack of sound, it was something else. A deadening dot, no crickets. No night birds, not even the high whine of wind brushing against the truck frame. Just that total, bloated silence, like sound had been scraped out of the world. When he pulled up to Station Echo, it looked like it always had. Pale floodlights buzzed overhead. The flag hung limp in the stillness. There was one other truck parked, near the side entrance, which meant someone was in there. Probably Bell or Hollister, the 2 other agents pulling night rotation. The door wasn't locked, never was, but when he pushed it open, he was hit by that same wall of silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed dimly overhead, but even that seemed hushed, underwater. Like the building itself had been dipped in something thick and strange. No one was at the front desk. The radio desk was empty too. He stepped inside, called out, "Hey, anyone on deck?" and listened to his own voice die in the air like a wounded animal, not echoing, just vanishing. He walked slowly down the main hallway, past the evidence locker, past the arms cage. He tried a few radios dead, tried the landline, nothing. The humming of electricity was there, faintly, like a whisper behind drywall, but nothing worked. The clock above the duty roster was frozen. It read 2:17. He kept walking. The hallway split left and right, break room one way, locker rooms and bunks the other. He chose the break room. Thought he'd check if maybe the others were in there, watching some crap on the TV or sneaking extra coffee. That's when he saw himself, sitting at the plastic break room table, back slouched, one boot up on another chair, crinkling slowly into a half-eaten bag of jalapeno kettle chips. Same uniform, same department patch, same belt with the frayed strap near the buckle. Same dark stubble around the jaw, same tired, wary eyes. No, not the same eyes. The thing looked up. The first thing Jose's noticed was that it smiled. Not like he would smile, no nervous pull of the cheek, no crinkle at the edges. It was like watching a marionette grin. Then he saw the eyes, not human, not even pretending to be. Solid black, like someone had filled its sockets with oil or tar or wet coal. No whites, no iris. Just gleaming black like an open well that could go forever. Down, he didn't move. Couldn't. His knees had gone loose and locked at the same time. The thing kept chewing, slowly, loudly, like it wanted him to hear every crunch. Jose finally said, "What the hell?" It raised its hand slowly, palm up, still chewing, and said in his voice, exactly his voice, "You're early." Then it winked. Jose stumbled back into the hallway, half tripping over the mop bucket near the janitor's closet. He turned to run, and that's when he heard the sound finally, a sound, the unmistakable shack of the break room chair sliding against tile. It was getting up. He ran, not out of instinct, not out of courage, pure survival. Something ancient and pre-language in him was howling to get away. He passed the armory, bolted for the back exit, punched the code on the keypad, and nothing. The lights blinked red. Locked. He spun around, and there it was, walking toward him. Same stride, same heavy boots. One hand in its jacket pocket, the other swinging lazily. Still smiling. "Where you headed, brother?" It asked, same voice, now with a drawl he didn't like. A mockery of warmth. Jose bolted down the hall, took the corner sharp, cut toward the bunk room. He wasn't thinking, just moving. Got to the back storage closet, slammed the door behind him, locked it. Inside it was dark, hot, airless. He pressed his ear to the door, heard the thing outside. Whistling. It whistled, "Take me home, country roads." Off-key. Then silence. He stayed in there an hour, maybe more. Sweating, heart thudding like boots on gravel. He held a box cutter in his hand. That was all he'd found. No one ever stocked weapons in the storage closet. Eventually, the silence got too big, too heavy. He cracked the door. Nothing. The hall was empty again. The lights still burned overhead, steady and humming. He walked out slowly, made his way to the main entrance. Still no one. The time was still 2:17. The clock hadn't moved. When he stepped outside, everything looked normal. His truck was still there. The flag hadn't moved. The air was still wrong. He got in, started it, drove. Didn't stop, not once. Not even to check if he was being followed. Didn't look in the mirror. Just drove. He quit the next morning. Didn't even show up for the exit interview. Left his badge in the mailbox of the El Paso field office. Never gave a real explanation. His wife said he wouldn't sleep in the same room as the uniform. Threw his boots in the fire pit out back. Wouldn't even talk about it. But a year later, at a bar in Van Horn, Jose got real drunk and talked to a guy named Rick who just started with the patrol. Rick said he was getting assigned to Echo. Jose got pale. Sighed, "Don't go. I'm not screwing with you. That place ain't right." Rick laughed it off. Thought Jose was just a washed-up vet with ghosts. A month later, Rick didn't come back from his shift. They found his truck idling out near the Chinati Mountains, doors open, radio buzzing with static. No sign of Rick. No tracks. Only thing out of place? The driver's seat was empty, but the seat belt was buckled. Tight. Back at Echo, they reviewed the cameras. They showed Rick entering the station at 1:52 a.m. on the night he disappeared. The footage ended at 2:17. Every single night since then, exactly at 2:17, the live feed from Echo cuts out for 60 seconds. Just goes dark, then comes back. Every time. And every once in a while, if you slow the footage way down, someone swears. You can see two men walking into the break room, both wearing the same uniform, same badge, same face, but only one ever walks out. Hank Wilcox had been driving rigs since he was 19, and by now, 27 years later, he could read the road like most folks read a paperback. He knew when the asphalt was about to shift texture, when a deer was about to leap from the ditch, and when a highway patrol cruiser was waiting just around the bend. He especially knew the stretch of Highway 277 near Carrizo Springs like the back of his calloused, grease-stained hand. It was the kind of road that lulled you into autopilot, long and flat and unchanging, cutting through the South Texas brushland like a knife through lard. Nothing but mesquite, prickly pear, and an occasional roadrunner darting across your headlights. He was hauling refrigerated meat from Laredo to Abilene, another graveyard run that put him alone on the road in the dead hours of the morning. Around 2:55 a.m., the CB had gone silent, the kind of quiet that presses in on your ears. He'd been sipping on truck stop coffee that tasted like burnt oil and humming low to a George Jones cassette when the fog hit. It wasn't like the wispy morning mists you sometimes saw hovering low over cattle fields. No, this was a wall. It rose from the ground like smoke from a blown transformer and hung in the air like it had weight, like it had intent. Hank didn't. Slow down, not at first. The fog was sudden, but he'd driven through worse. He flipped on his high beams, but they just bounced back at him, turning the windshield into a glowing white screen. Then the resistance started. Not the engine, that still growled steady beneath him, but the air. It was like pushing the Peterbilt through molasses. The wheel pulled, the tires felt like they were dragging over wet tar, and his ears popped once. Sharply. The strange thing was the sound. Or rather, the lack of it. The hum of tires on pavement, the rattle of the empty coffee thermos in the cue folder, even the faint wheeze of his own breath, gone. It was as if he'd been wrapped in wool and then he was through. There wasn't a precise moment of exit. No clear line between fog and not fog. But suddenly, the air was light again, and he could see, not far, but far enough to notice the change. The road was still there, mostly. Still 2 lanes, still edged by the brush. Country, but the colors were wrong. Washed out like a sun-faded photograph. The sky had that pre-dawn shade of greenish black, but the stars looked wrong. Too bright. Too close. He squinted at a sign on the right shoulder. White with black letters, but the text made his brain lurch. Precaution. Curve zone ahead, reduca su velocity. The word velocity stood out. Not speed, not velocidad. Some half-breed version that didn't belong on a Texas highway. Hank's lip curled. He passed another sign. Proxima Salida, Glassfield Junction, 6 kilometers. Kilometers? He muttered. Who the hell put up metric signs in Dimmitt County? 10 miles, maybe more, passed under his wheels. He saw no cars, no signs of life, not even a distant farmhouse light. Just more twisted signage, with words like Texaco spelled as Texaco and Llano Gas Stop, next to a shuttered station with its windows painted black. That's when he saw the hearse it sat in the opposite lane, parked at an angle, with its nose in the brush. Old-fashioned, black with chrome trim, long as a canoe and just as silent. Hank slowed instinctively, the hair on his arms rising. No headlights, no brake lights, not even a flicker from the dashboard as he passed. He turned his head. The driver's seat was empty. The back window, half obscured by dusty curtains, showed a white shape laid out long ways inside. He only caught a glimpse, enough to see that it wasn't a casket. It was a body, uncovered. Pale and very still. Then he blacked out. No sharp pain. No crash, just a curtain dropping. When he woke, daylight poured through the windshield like warm milk. His truck was parked neatly on the shoulder of Highway 277, facing north toward Abilene. Birds chirped. A state trooper's SUV was idling behind him, lights spinning lazily. Hank blinked against the brightness. His mouth tasted like copper and rust. His wristwatch had stopped at 3:04 a.m. The trooper was a young guy, pale and twitchy, and he knocked on the window with the butt of his flashlight. Sir, you okay? What time is it?" Hank rasped. "About 9:15, Friday morning." "That can't be right," Hank said, his throat tightening. "It was just Tuesday night." He had 62 missed calls. His dispatcher, his wife, his daughter, 2 cops from Laredo. There was a bolo out on him. They found no damage to the truck, no signs of trauma. Hank hadn't eaten. His thermos was still full. The odometer showed he'd driven roughly 10.4 extra miles beyond the last known GPS. Ping before stopping. He didn't tell them about the fog, or the signs, or the hearse. He just nodded and took the citation for improper parking on a state road. That would have been the end of it, but Hank couldn't let it lie. Not when he checked his dashcam footage later and found it had glitched out for exactly 11 minutes to 3 a.m. to 3:11. When the feed resumed, the truck was already parked, and outside the window, behind the bush, something moved. Too tall, too thin, and too slow. He spent the next few months trying to find Glassfield Junction. It doesn't exist. Not on any Texas maps. Not in Mexico. Not in any trucking database. But one night, unable to sleep, Hank posted anonymously on a long-haul driver forum. Anyone ever seen a hearse on 277 near Carrizo Springs? No driver. Body in the back, followed by memory loss. He got a single reply. Don't drive into the fog. It's not weather. It's a border. He doesn't truck at night anymore. Won't go south of San Antonio. But sometimes he dreams about those warped signs and wakes up with a nosebleed and the taste of embalming fluid on his tongue. Last month, a young driver named Kyle Lopez went missing along that same stretch of road. His truck was found idling, headlights on. No sign of struggle. CB mic still active. Hank saw the report and noted the timestamp on the photo of the dash clock, 3:06 m. The search dogs picked up a scent that led 30 yards off the road, and then stopped cold. Just dead brush and cracked earth. No tracks. No footprints. Just a thin ribbon of fog, still clinging to the morning air like something not quite finished passing through. Dead border birds near El Indio. TXIT started with the kind of story people pass around in bars and truck stops. Something strange enough to make you squint and chuckle nervously, but not serious enough to report. The kind of thing that makes you say, huh, and maybe lock your doors a little tighter at night. But the road south of El Indio, Texas, that long, lonely stretch hugging the Rio Grande, had a new kind of rumor attached to it. Not just whispers. Not just folklore. Something. Worse. Something. Observed. Highway 3078, especially the miles just east of town, doesn't see much traffic past dusk. The locals know better. It's 2 lanes of cracked asphalt bordered by low mesquite, the occasional rusted fence post, and empty fields stretching out to the river. The air smells of dust and something metallic, like rain that never comes. Border. Patrol runs it now and then, but they avoid it after sunset. Even they can't explain why. The first story to hit the internet came from a man named Hal Newman, a long-haul driver from Amarillo. Hal wasn't the kind to spook easy. He had 2 decades of nighttime driving behind him, said he preferred the dark. No traffic. Just him, the road, and his thoughts. But his voice cracked when he posted that video, and if you've seen it, the real version, not the blurry TikTok re-uploads, you understand why. In the video, Hal's dashcam records the usual nighttime hum, engine noise, the occasional crackle of the CB radio, headlights painting the road like a pale, shifting tunnel. Then, around 2:14 a.m., the birds show up. At first, it looks like a regular flock. They appear from the right shoulder, maybe a dozen small shapes. You'd think they're sparrows or grackles, the kind that nest under bridge girders and explode into the air all at once, but these don't fly across the road. They hover, in place, right above the pavement, suspended in midair, all of them facing the truck. Not flapping, not gliding. Just still, Hal slams the brakes. You can hear it, the tires screech, the loose chains on his flatbed rattling. The truck slows down too late, plows through the cluster. But instead of thuds or feathers or shattered bodies, there's only a series of faint, dry thwops, like handfuls of ash hitting the windshield. No blood, no bones, just black smudges, thin and greasy, trailing in the headlights like soot. Then the camera glitches. Not for long, maybe half a second, but enough to make your stomach twist. And when the feed stabilizes, Hal's breathing is audible, ragged, panicked. He whispers something. Over and over, they weren't flying. He pulled over 10 miles later, shaking so badly he couldn't turn off the ignition. Later, when he reviewed the footage, he saw what made him stop driving nights altogether. Frame by frame, you can freeze the video and see each bird clearly. Not sparrows, not anything natural. Beaks too long, eyes too round, and wings that stretched wide but never moved, like plastic models hanging from wires. Their legs hung limp, and their feathers weren't quite right, almost translucent, as if they were made of smoke, bound into the shape of birds by something that didn't understand how birds worked. Hal's video got taken down within days, flagged as manipulated, but others started speaking up. A rancher's teenage son had. Then driving home from Eagle Pass one night when the birds struck his windshield too. He told his dad they looked like shadows, but they left stains that wouldn't wash off. They had to replace the glass dot. Another woman, Teresa Alvarez, a nurse from El Indio, told reporters she hit something near mile marker 41, swerved into the ditch. When she got out, dazed but unhurt, her headlights lit up the road behind her. And there they were, dozens of them, perched on the ground, not moving, lined up in rows, neat as pencils. Watching Dot, she didn't drive that, rode again. People started calling them the border birds. A few even blamed cartel smugglers or drone surveillance tech gone wrong. But the birds left no wreckage, no signal, no sound, only that same black smear. And sometimes, this part always gave me chills, a smell, like burnt sugar and rot. I didn't believe it until I saw them myself. It was early October, during one of those blistering autumns when the air doesn't cool at night. I'd been in Eagle Pass visiting my cousin who'd had a stroke, and I was heading back east toward Crystal City. I usually took the highway, but I'd had a long day and figured the back road would be quicker. It was 11:20 p.m. when I passed the El Indio sign, and the sky was a flat, moonless black. The kind of black you can feel. I didn't see the first ones until I hit the stretch by the old pumping station, a rusted building half sunk into mesquite. The shoulder widened there, and I thought I saw movement near the fence line. I slowed a little. At first, it looked like trash blowing in the breeze, but it wasn't trash. It was wings. Not flapping, just ... shifting, like paper caught in an invisible current. Then they lifted off, maybe 20 of them. Straight up, silent. No bird makes that kind of motionless ascent, not owls, not bats. These things didn't flap. They just rose like balloons and then turned all at once to face my car. I should have hit the gas. I should have turned around. But I didn't. I crept forward, heart pounding. My high beams caught them fully now. They hovered just above the hood, spaced perfectly apart like they were waiting for something. Their shapes were bird-like, sure, but wrong in dozens of subtle ways. Tails that tapered off into wisps. Feet that never curled. And their eyes, too large, too human, glowed faintly like wet obsidian under the lights. One of them started drifting closer. Not flying, just ... gliding. As it neared, I swore to God it opened its beak. Not like a bird, wider, too wide. A slit that stretched past where the jaw should end. There was no sound, but I felt pressure in my ears. My nose started bleeding. I reversed, hard, tires screaming. And as I backed away, the others moved with it. Not fast, not aggressive. Just deliberate. Like they decided to follow. I drove. The rest of the way doing 85, hands locked on the wheel, eyes darting to the rear view every few seconds. The birds didn't follow past the tree line. They stopped at the county border, and when I got home, I checked my windshield. No cracks, no impact. Just a faint smear of black that wouldn't come off. Not with soap. Not with bleach dot. Over the next few weeks, more people came forward. A trucker passed out behind the wheel and was found on the side of the road with 2 flat tires and the inside of his cab covered in black handprints, child-sized. A family coming back from a quinceañera outside Carrizo Springs reported hitting something feathery, then losing 2 hours of time. Their baby wouldn't stop crying for days, wouldn't sleep. Just stared at the window. No one has found a nest, no carcasses. No remains. And when a team from the university in San Antonio came down to investigate, they found their cameras malfunctioned every time they passed the mile 41 marker. One grad student went missing for 40 minutes. They found him wandering a dry creek. Bed, whispering in a language no one recognized. Locals have started putting up crosses near the turnoffs. Some refuse to drive at night. Others bless their tires before long trips. The gas station in El Indio sells bird charms made from twisted wire and feathers. They don't work. Nothing does. The smudges are still showing up. The birds still hover. And whatever they are, they're not birds. Not really. Just the shape of them. The idea of them. Something using the form of something familiar, like camouflage. Like bait. Some say they're drawn to fear. Others think they're watching for something or someone that's already passed through. But the scariest theory I've heard came from an old man named Roke, who used to work near the river mapping land for developers. He sat beside me one night at the bar in Crystal City and said, "Dead serious. Those birds? They ain't flying 'cause they don't need to. They're not here to move. They're here to wait." "Wait for what?" I asked. He didn't blink. Just stared into his beer. For the ones behind them. It was around 9:30 at night when Tomas first saw the man on the side of Route 16, just south of Freer, Texas. The road stretched long and black between patches of mesquite and scrub brush, and his headlights swept across the shoulders in a yellow arc as he wound his way eastward, heading toward Jourdanton. He'd just finished a long delivery haul from Laredo and was dead tired. The kind of tired that makes the world look like it's underwater, light smeared across the windshield, road lines floating and wavering. His old Dodge Ram was rattling. A little more than usual, but it was reliable enough. The AC had finally cooled the cab down from the sun's furnace, and now the desert night was settling like a thick wool blanket. That's when he saw the man. He stood just off the gravel shoulder. In the high beam spill, tall and thin and too still. He wore a light blue hospital gown under a white scrub top, both stained and wrinkled, and a set of ankle chains hung from his legs, the slack links catching the light like little flashes of lightning. His head was shaved and pale, the skin waxy kind of pale, like candle grease. One hand was raised slightly, not a full hitchhiking thumb, just a gesture. Like he was waiting. Tomas didn't normally stop, not out here. Not this late. But something about the guy didn't scream dangerous, more lost, maybe sick. And if he was from a hospital, he could be hurt, confused, or worse. Tomas slowed down, checked his mirrors for any other cars, none, and pulled onto the shoulder, dust kicking up around the tires. He leaned across the passenger seat and pushed the door open. The man climbed in without a word. Tomas gave him a quick glance. He smelled faintly like antiseptic and something else, maybe old metal or salt water. The chains clinked gently when he moved his legs. "You all right, man?" Tomas asked. The man didn't answer right away. He just looked forward, jaw slack, eyes wide and unblinking. Finally he said, voice barely audible, "Thanks for stopping." Tomas nodded, pulling back onto the road. "You from that place outside Catula?" "The psych facility?" Again silence. "Then, sort of." Tomas glanced at him again. "You need a ride somewhere specific?" The man slowly turned his head. His lips cracked open into the beginning of a smile, but it never reached his eyes. "Just away." "All right," Tomas thought. One of those nights. They drove in silence for a long while, the truck rumbling low over the patched-up road. Every now and then, Tomas tried to make out the man's face more clearly in the dim light, but shadows seemed to cling to his features unnaturally. His reflection didn't show clearly in the window, just a smudge like a face drawn in fog. 20 minutes passed. Maybe 30. No cars behind or ahead. Just the moon sliding up like a dusty coin over the thorny brushland. That's when the man spoke again. "Do you believe in dying more than once?" Tomas felt a chill move from the back of his neck down his spine. He turned his head slightly, instinctively, but the words didn't register immediately. "What?" Silence. He looked. Again. The passenger seat was empty. No door had opened. No wind. No sound of chains. The seat belt still hung unused. But the vinyl seat cushion bore faint impressions, the kind that come from someone sitting for a while, and etched lightly into the material were two narrow, parallel grooves. Like from chains, Tomas pulled the truck over, hard and fast. Tires skidding on the shoulder. He shoved open the door and jumped out, heart thudding. He circled the truck, opened the passenger door again, peered into the cab. Empty. He even looked underneath the seat. Nothing. He stood there for a long time, staring down the road behind him. It stretched into nothingness, moonlit and still. The air had gone cold, unnaturally so, and the silence seemed too deep, like the world had paused. Finally, shaking, he climbed back in and drove home. He tried to convince himself it had been a hallucination, exhaustion playing tricks on his eyes. But when he got home and parked in his driveway, the cab light flicked on. It caught those faint chain marks in perfect detail, as if they'd been burned into the vinyl. Two sets, one beside the other, swaying slightly. The smell was still there, stronger now, antiseptic, metal, something like decay. He didn't tell anyone, not at first. What would he say? A ghost hitchhiker? One that just ... appeared and vanished? A week later, he started having the dreams. They were always the same. He was driving down Route 16 again, but the road kept stretching endlessly, never reaching town. The moon hung huge and orange overhead, and the desert around him was flooded. Not with water, but with hospital beds. Hundreds of them, all sunken into the earth like gravestones, and each bed had a person lying motionless beneath a pale sheet. The hitchhiker was always there, standing at the side of the road, his face hidden, hand raised slightly. The chains around his ankles would drag across the ground when he walked. In the dream, Tomas never stopped, but no matter how far he drove, the man was always ahead again. Waiting. After 2 weeks of this, Tomas finally drove back out to Route 16. He retraced his drive that night, watching the shoulder, looking for any hint of the man. It was around the same time, close to 9:30, when he found a stretch of cracked asphalt and gravel that felt ... familiar. He pulled over and stepped out. The night air was dead still. Crickets had gone quiet. The brushland felt darker than usual, like the stars themselves were dimmer here. That's when he heard it ... chains ... not loud, more like a faint rattle, far off but unmistakable. He turned, scanning the brush with a flashlight, but saw nothing. Just brittle weeds, tangled mesquite, dry soil. Then the light caught something metallic in the dirt near the roadside. He knelt down. It was a hospital ID tag. Scratched and sun-bleached, but still legible. The name read, Aaron Blake, with a faded photo of the man, the same face he remembered from that night. Under the name were the words Hill Ridge Psychiatric Facility, but the place had burned down. Tomas remembered now. There'd been a news story about it years ago. Patients died in the fire. Staff too. One had escaped before the blaze, only to be found later, wandering Route 16 in chains. According to the article, he'd thrown himself in front of a semi near mile marker 241. Died instantly. Only. That's where Thomas had picked him up, right near that marker. He left the tag where it was and drove home, but the dreams didn't stop. In fact, they got worse. Now, the man was speaking more in them, not shouting, not pleading, just asking, "Do you believe in dying more than once?" Each night, the words got closer to his ear. Each time, the man looked a little more decayed, lips missing, eyes sunken, jaw askew. The chains no longer clinked gently. They scraped and dragged like they were rusted shut. Then the dream started bleeding into his days. He'd glance in the rearview mirror and see the man sitting in the back seat, or catch a reflection in a storefront window that didn't match what was really beside him. The passenger seat sometimes groaned when he hit a bump, even when he was alone. Finally, unable to take it anymore, he visited Hill Ridge's ruins. What was left of them, anyway? Just twisted metal and scorched brick off an old service road south of Cotulla. He found the remains of the intake records in a burned filing cabinet. Aaron Blake had been admitted for repeated claims that he'd died in his dreams and woke up in different lives. The staff believed he suffered from dissociative psychosis. They had no idea how he'd gotten the chains, no hospital issued. Then, the fire had started in his room. It never left Tomas after that. Years passed. He moved away, changed jobs, even sold the old Dodge Ram. But some nights, especially around 9:30, especially near long, empty highways, he still sees him. Sometimes just a flash in the mirror. Other times a voice in the dark cab of whatever vehicle he's driving. Do you believe in dying more than once? And when he checks the seat next to him, even if no one's there, there's always a faint pressure, like someone sitting beside him, waiting. They don't mark it on any official map anymore. County records still show a winding stretch of asphalt listed as FM 2698 extension, but locals know better. They call it El Camino de Sangre, the Road of Blood. It's about 9 miles north of Rama, Texas, where the scrubland turns harsh and empty, and even the mesquites grow twisted. There's a turnoff past a rusted-out gas station, just a cracked sign and a sun-bleached cattle gate straining against time. It's the kind of road people drive past without even noticing, and those who do notice, well, they're the ones you don't hear from again. The stories about that place go back generations, older than the crumbling mission ruins in the brush, and older than the abandoned cattle ranch that sits rotting behind a field of thorns. Everyone in Starr County has heard a version. They say the ground out there is wrong, that it drinks blood and spits it back, that coyotes won't cross it, and birds don't fly over. That sometimes, when the wind's just right, you can hear lowing from cattle that haven't been alive in 50 years, but none of that mattered much to Elijah Mendoza. Not at first. He was a 36-year-old field investigator for a private insurance firm out of McAllen. Tough, practical, sunburned to the color of old leather. His job was tracking down rural fraud claims, the kind that involved fake livestock reports or deliberately torched barns. The company had gotten an anonymous tip about a supposedly abandoned cattle ranch up north being used for something shady meth. Cooking, illegal slaughter, maybe both. They wanted pictures. GPS coordinates, paperwork. No one expected ghosts. Elijah wasn't superstitious, but he was cautious. He grew up in Zapata and knew how things worked along the border, what you saw, what you didn't talk about, and what roads you didn't go down unless you had family waiting on the other end. Still, money was tight that month and he couldn't afford to turn down a paying gig, especially one that might earn him a bonus if the tip turned out legit. So on a burning Tuesday afternoon in late August, Elijah drove north in his battered Ford Bronco with a full tank, 2 cameras, and a Glock in the glove box. He passed the ranching towns that dotted Highway 83 like dried scabs, towns with shuttered diners and sun-bleached churches and dogs that barked without barking at anything. By the time he reached the turnoff, the sun was low and the shadows of the hills had stretched long and lean like fingers. He stopped in front of the old gate. The paint was gone, eaten away by decades of sun and dust, and the barbed wire that once secured it had long since unraveled. Beyond the gate was a narrow, buckled road that looked like it hadn't seen a working vehicle in years. He stepped out and listened. Not even the buzz of insects. Just dry wind and the low creak of distant fencing. He took the camera out, snapped a few shots. The earth was a strange color here, not red clay or black loam, but something in between. Almost a bruised hue, like dried blood under skin. He crouched and took another photo of the cracked road. That's when he saw the stain. It looked like oil at first, black and slick, spread across the center of the asphalt in a wide puddle. But as he moved closer, he saw the edges were too sharp, too thick. It wasn't soaking into the pavement. It sat there, as if resting on top of the surface, glinting in the sun. He touched it with a gloved finger and felt the tacky resistance of something viscous. He looked around. No tire marks. No signs of an accident. Just that wide dark pool. Then he noticed the smell. Copper. Sweet, wet copper, like a butcher's apron. Left in the sun. He backed up and tried not to gag. Took one more photo. That's when he saw the deer. It was maybe 30 feet up the road, lying dead in the middle of the cracked pavement. A young buck, not yet fully grown. Its legs were stretched out as if placed with care, and its antlers were unbroken. But its eyes gone. Hollow black sockets stared skyward, and its tongue had been removed with surgical precision. No blood around the wounds. No tracks, just the deer staring into nothing. He took a few shots, zoomed in. Something about the placement felt wrong, deliberate. He checked his watch. 7:13 p.m., he should have turned around right then. But he didn't. Instead, Elijah stepped around the deer, walked another quarter-mile down the road to the ranch gate. The house in the distance was skeletal, a 2-story farmhouse with missing shingles and broken porch columns. Windows gaped, like mouths. The barn beside it had collapsed in on itself, its frame resembling a rib cage. But what caught his eye was the old cattle chute. Metal rails still stood upright, though rusted, and a dark shape leaned against them. He zoomed in through the camera lens and frowned. It was a calf skull bleached white, mounted on a stake. He took a picture. A sound broke the silence, a low hum. Mechanical, rising in pitch, then cutting out. He turned and looked around, but saw nothing. Just the road, the deer, the distant hills. Then his nose started bleeding. At first it was just a drip. Then a steady stream. Warmed down his lip, soaking into his shirt. He cursed, tilted his head back, but it kept coming. It felt wrong, not just a nosebleed, but like something had broken loose inside his skull. He rushed back to the Bronco, fumbled for a rag, and pressed it to his face. The bleeding didn't stop until he was halfway back to the highway. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the deer, the way it had been laid out, the dark liquid on the road. The hum. He plugged the memory card into his laptop, but the folder was empty. Not corrupted, not deleted. Empty. He pulled the card out and stared at it. Then he noticed something scratched into the plastic tiny, like it had been etched with a needle. No ES safe. He tried to laugh it off. Tried to convince himself he was just tired. But around midnight, he felt the first drop, warm, down his lip. By morning, his apartment floor was spattered with red, and he was too weak to stand. His last coherent act was crawling to the bathroom with the camera in his hand. His phone lay untouched on the table. He never called for help. The police found him the next day after his supervisor reported him missing. He was in the tub, dried blood clinging to the tile, the camera clutched in his stiff fingers. The memory card was gone. The official report listed acute arterial rupture of the nasal cavity as cause of death. They didn't test the blood. Under his fingernails, they didn't examine the footage on his laptop because it was never there. They didn't go looking for the ranch. And the road? Still not marked. Still not maintained. Still there. Sometimes, when the wind shifts, truckers say they smell copper in the air near mile marker 184. Sometimes they see shapes in the dark that don't move right. And every now and then, the county maintenance crew finds a smear of something dark on the road. They don't test it. They just pour fresh gravel and pray. It sinks into the earth like everything else. They were just patching up a broken road sign outside Hebronville, Texas State Highway 16, somewhere between nowhere and less than nowhere, where cell reception barely held on and the mesquite grew like it had something to prove. The crew was small. Just 4 men in sun-bleached vests and steel-toed boots, working off a county contract that barely paid enough to keep their trucks running. It was supposed to be a quick fix, a bent speed limit sign some drunk must have clipped the night before. Nothing strange about that. Happens all the time out there. Ray was the first to see it. Not the kind of guy prone to dramatics. He was maybe 45, looked 60, quiet as hell but sharp. Everyone on the crew respected him. When he told them to hang on a sec, they thought maybe he dropped a tool or spotted a snake. But he didn't bend down. He just stared past the sign, jaw going slack. "What is it?" asked Mando. Younger guy, used to rattlesnakes and roadkill but still new enough to this work that he hadn't learned not to ask. Ray didn't answer. He stepped forward, squinting at the metal post where the sign had bent. "Behind it," he muttered. "There's something behind it." They thought maybe a coyote or some skinny meth head from one of the busted trailers dotting the scrubland. It was early, the sun still climbing and the heat already hummed off the pavement, but there wasn't anything moving. Not at first. Then the wind shifted and Mando saw it too. Not a coyote. Not a man. It was pale. Sickly white, like paper soaked in milk, with skin stretched thin over a shape too tall to belong in any family of mammals. It hunched low to the ground but had to be at least 7 feet if it stood upright. Its arms, or what passed for arms, were long, jointed wrong, folded against its sides like insect legs. And its head? Its head was small, pinched like something. Unfinished. It didn't look at them, not exactly. But they could feel it noticing them. They could feel it like cold breath on the back of the neck. Then it moved. Not forward, not back. Sideways, like a crab. Like a spider. A sick, twitchy slide that kicked up no dust and made no sound. 1 second, it was behind the sign. The next, it was 20 feet to the left, halfway into the brush, crouched behind a prickly pear as if daring someone to follow. Ray took a step back. "We need to call this in." "Call what in?" said Mando, blinking hard. "What do we even say?" Don't care. Call it in. Eddie, their foreman, had just come back from pissing behind the truck. What's going on? He asked, zipping up. You guys find a body or something? Ray didn't answer. He was already on the radio, getting static and pops. Then, voice from dispatch. Say again? You're calling from Mexico? Repeat. You're coming through from south of La Gloria. How did you get across the border? What the hell are you talking about? Ray barked. We're on 16, just north of Hebronville, right by mile marker 144. No, sir, the voice said, less certain now. Your signal's pinging from just outside La Squara. That's 50 miles south. You're on the wrong side of the river. They all stared at each other. The truck was still right there. Their orange cones still lined the shoulder. The broken sign stood just ahead, its pole bent from the base like a drunk knee. The terrain hadn't changed. But when Mando pulled up the GPS on his phone, it showed the same thing. They were blinking on a dusty road in Mexico. I don't. He started, and then the screen turned black. Just when Dead Ray dropped the radio. We're leaving. Eddie didn't argue, and that told the others all they needed to know. The foreman was usually the kind of guy who'd chew your ear off for breaking protocol, but now his face was pale and hard. He'd seen something too. Maybe not the creature, but enough. They packed up in minutes. No one looked back at the sign, but something followed Dot first. It was the GPS refusing to correct itself. The map spinning lazy circles like they were floating somewhere unpinned. Then the horizon started to feel wrong, flatter than it should have been, with no sense of distance. The sun, too high, too early. Colors washed out like old photographs. Even the wind stopped. Just stopped. Not a leaf moved on the thorny branches. Outside, it was like driving through a painting. Mando kept checking the side mirrors. He couldn't help it. There was something off about the reflections. The brush didn't match what was ahead of them. Sometimes he swore he saw movement, a flash of white, a glimpse of two long limbs scuttling just out of view. They passed a town sign an hour later. It was rusted to hell, pockmarked with bullet holes, but it read, Bienvenidos a Santa Estela. None of them had heard of it. It wasn't on any map. No cell towers, no signal, no signs of life, just crumbling buildings that looked decades abandoned. But the truck sputtered just outside the town's edge. Dead. Eddie popped the hood and cursed. Nothing wrong. It just stopped. They didn't want to stay long. But the sun wasn't moving anymore. It hung in the same part of the sky, hot and dull, like a heat lamp over a cage. They tried walking. The town had a small church, its doors open like a mouth mid-scream. Inside were rows of wooden pews coated in dust and what looked like dried. Blood trailing toward the altar. In the corner, a shrine was built from road signs stacked like a twisted sculpture. One of them still had fresh mud on it. Mile marker 144. Ray stared at it, then back at the open doorway. It's keeping us. Here. Why? Mando asked, voice tight. I think it's trying to replace something. Replace? Ray didn't answer. But later, when the shadows began moving on their own, stretching the wrong direction, pulsing with the sound of distant scraping, they understood. They tried to sleep in the truck. One by one, they woke up screaming. Always at the same time. 3:13 a.m. Always to the same image burned into their heads. That pale thing crawling sideways across the inside of their own skulls. Whispering in static. By the fourth day, Eddie disappeared. No tracks, no noise. Just gone. They searched the town, but the streets seemed longer now. Twisting. The buildings didn't stay in the same places. 1 minute the grocery store was on the right, the next it was gone. Replaced by a gas station they hadn't seen before, and then came the copy. Mando saw it first, sitting in the back seat of the truck where Eddie used to sit. Same vest, same hair, same boots. But its face was too smooth, too pale. And when it opened its mouth, it let out that same static whisper. They ran. Ray lit the truck on fire. It didn't scream. It just stood there, watching the flames eat the tires. It looked out of place, like it didn't understand fire. The next morning, the town was gone. Nothing but open scrubland and a straight road north. No ruins, no signs, no dust on their boots. They walked until they found a ranger station near Falfurrias. Got picked up. The ranger said they looked like they'd been out for weeks. They were sunburned, dehydrated, covered in cuts and old blood. The road crew had been reported missing 3 weeks prior. Only Ray and Mando made it back. The others were never found. Neither man spoke about what happened. But Ray doesn't drive anymore. Doesn't sleep much either. And Mando? He started carving road signs, small wooden replicas. Leaves them at the edge of town. No one knows why. But folks say sometimes, if you drive just south of Hebronville, past mile marker 144, you'll see a pale figure watching you from behind a road sign. It won't run. It never does. And if you stop, the GPS won't show Texas anymore. They say the fog rolls in thick over Progreso Lakes every few years. Real thick, the kind that muffles sound and light like a wool blanket soaked in swamp water. Folks in the Rio Grande Valley don't like to talk much about it, but if you're sitting at the counter of a Whataburger past midnight or hunched over a beer at the edge of a VFW dance hall, the older men might let a few pieces slip. Not the whole story? No, never that. Just enough to put a chill in your back and make you keep to the highways. It was October when the fog came early. Heavy and wrong, like it had something buried in it. My cousin Ricky, who was always trying to prove how nothing scared him, not the cartel stories, not the Gulf winds, decided he'd take the back way out to Weslaco after a fight with his girl. I told him not to. Said even the GPS never showed anything good west of Progreso Lakes, and we all knew better than to drive blind through that country at night. He just laughed, flicked a beer cap at me, and said he knew the roads like the back of his hand. That was the last time I saw him. We found his truck 3 days later, just sitting quiet in a sugarcane field, doors wide open, radio still humming static. Keys dangling in the ignition like someone had just stepped out for a smoke. But there was mud packed into the floorboards, dark and cold like riverbed silt, and none of us could figure out how it got there when the fields were dry that whole week. No tire tracks, no footprints. Ricky's story would have been just another tragic local mystery. Maybe he ran off, maybe something worse, except for the dash cam. The footage only ran 12 minutes, but what it caught made my stomach curdle in a way that still wakes me up some nights. The beginning was normal. Ricky grumbling into the mic, cussing about his girl, lighting a cigarette. Then the fog hit like a wave, erasing everything past the headlights. His voice cracked. You could hear the nerves creeping in, and that's when the road changed. You can see it in the footage. Pavement giving way to loose gravel, then dirt. Gnarled mesquite and carrizo thickets closed in like claws. A second later, the truck splashed through a shallow stream that wasn't on any map. That was the first water crossing. He started to turn around. You can see him hesitate. His hand twitched toward the gear shift. But the road curved deeper into the fog, and something in it must have called to him. He drove on. The second crossing was rougher. Water up to the axles, the kind of murky, brackish runoff that comes from nowhere and goes nowhere. The radio cut. Out. No signal. That's when things shifted. The temperature reading on the dash dropped from 78 to 43 in less than a minute. The camera lens started fogging from the inside. And just after the second crossing, in the shadows behind Ricky's seat, something moved. She didn't appear with fanfare. No flash, no scream. 1 second the back seat was empty. The next, there she was, sitting straight up, her black hair stringy and soaked, face turned slightly away as if looking out the passenger side window. You couldn't see her eyes, only the bone-pale cheek and jawline. The edge of a mouth too wide, too still. Ricky must have felt her before he saw her, because he kept glancing in the rearview mirror, his voice cracking as he muttered, "No, no, no." But he didn't stop. Didn't look full on. He kept going. He never made it to the third crossing. The video ends with a low sound, like a moan underwater and the truck jerking hard to the right. The camera slams sideways and the feed cuts. We searched the whole area. Even got some border patrol guys to poke around the brush, but no one found a third water crossing. No one found Ricky, except me. Sort of doubt about 6 months later. I saw him, Dad. It was another foggy morning, early February, cold enough to make the grass snap under your boots. I just dropped off a delivery near Bluetown and was driving back through the canal roads, taking it slow. The fog came down fast. Too fast. Like someone poured it from the sky, and then the road changed. Same dirt. Same twisted mesquite shadows. My stomach dropped. I slammed the brakes and fumbled for my phone. No signal. The GPS spun in circles, and then I heard her, not screaming like the old stories say. Just weeping, soft and endless, like someone crying in the next room behind a closed door. It filled the truck, came from nowhere and everywhere, and my chest tightened like I was 10 years old again. Hiding in the closet during a thunderstorm, I saw the first water crossing. The truck rolled through it like it wasn't there, but the water felt wrong, heavy, like it pulled at the tires. I didn't want to go further. I was gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles cracked. Second crossing. She was there. I didn't see her appear. She was just there. Soaked dress clinging to her, head tilted. You could feel her watching you even without eyes. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield, and my heartbeat pounded in my ears like drums. I kept repeating the rule. Don't look in the mirror before the third. Don't look in the mirror before the third. But it's not that easy. There's a weight to her. Pressure behind your eyes that wants you to look. Like your own brain is turning against you. I saw the third crossing ahead, narrow and slick with greenish water, framed by dead trees that shouldn't have grown in that soil. Just before I hit the water, something shifted in the truck. Cold breath on my neck. The faint rustle of fabric, and then I heard his voice. "Cuz?" I swear to God. Ricky, his voice was hoarse, thin, like it had been dragged through gravel. I broke. I looked. Just a glance. Just a flick of my eyes to the mirror. There was no woman, only Ricky. Sitting in the back seat, eyes gone milky white, skin wrinkled and waterlogged like he'd been soaking in a canal for months. His mouth opened too wide, his jaw unhinged like a snake's, and something else crawled out. Not a scream, not a sound, just darkness, like it sucked the light out of the cab. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up in a roadside ditch outside of Mercedes, covered in mud and half frozen, with water leaking from my ears. The truck was gone. No one believed me, but I know what I saw. And now, every time the fog rolls in near Progresso Lakes, I hear that weeping again, faint, just behind the wind. People still disappear. Farmhands, drifters. A teacher once, heading home late from a conference. The official line is accidents or cartel violence, or just folks running off. But I know better. There's a shortcut out there, one that only shows when the fog is heavy. And your heart's heavy too, she rides. With you, and if you look before the third crossing, you'll disappear. Only you won't be gone, not really. They say Falcon Lake has moods, that it breathes different depending on who's listening and what kind of silence you bring with you. Locals in Zapata talk about the wind patterns like they're superstitions. Fishermen mark their calendars by the pull of the moon more than the tides, and the folks down near the border whisper things they don't even tell their own kin after dark. There's a hush around Falcon Lake that feels older than Texas itself, older than Mexico too, like something ancient squats under the water, half forgotten and waiting. I first heard about the Smiling Man in a bar just off US 83 south of Laredo, one of those cracked linoleum places that smells like fried catfish and diesel sweat. A retired game warden named Enrico told me, slumped over a Shinerbach like the beer might drown the memory. He said it real quiet, eyes not quite meeting mine. They hum, he said. They don't blink, they don't move not until you notice them. Then they start that humming, like wires under your skin. He told me about a man named Carlos Fuentes, a solo fisherman who ran nightlines on the Zapata side of the lake. Carlos had a little aluminum John boat and a '98 Dodge Ram with more rust than paint. He'd been fishing the lake since he was a kid, knew it better than most. But after what happened in July of 2018, he never set foot on the water again. Hell, he barely left his trailer. Carlos went out just before dusk, as he always did. He baited his lines with cut shad, motored out past the submerged trees near the Mexican border close enough that the GPS on his phone kept shifting back and forth across the invisible line. That night, the water was still as oil, and the bugs were thick in the air, the kind that buzz low near your ears and don't care how much DEET you spray. He was about to head in, about 2 a.m., when he saw them, 3 pale figures, waist deep in the shallows near the shore. At first, he thought they were kids, maybe illegals caught up in some cartel mess, but they didn't move right. They were too still. They were standing in a perfect triangle, far enough apart to be unnatural, too symmetrical to be a coincidence. And they were grinning. Carlos told Enrico that their skin looked ... wrong, like it was made of wax or something chalky. Not sickly, but sterile. The kind of pale that has never felt sunlight. No eyebrows, no hair at all. Just smooth, blank flesh, with mouths stretched wide in identical smiles, like mannequins sculpted in the act of mockery. He turned the boat toward shore to yell at them, maybe to help, he wasn't sure. That's when they started humming low at first, like static you can feel instead of hear. The sound climbed inside his head, not through his ears but straight into the meat of his brain, like pressure building behind his eyes. He said it made. His teeth hurt. The motor sputtered and died. Lights went out. He floated there for nearly 2 hours, drifting silently, too scared to paddle. The smiling men never moved, never blinked. Just stood there, humming and grinning, even as the sun started bleeding over the water. When Carlos finally managed to paddle back to shore, he beached the boat crooked, left his gear, and drove straight to the ranger station where Enrico was just clocking in. He didn't speak at first, just sat in his soaked seat, shaking, a man hollowed out. Enrico didn't believe him, of course. Not then, but protocol said he had to go check it out. So they drove back down to the shore. Carlos wouldn't get out of the truck. He just pointed toward the water, hands trembling. The smiling men were gone, but 3 sets of wet footprints bare, human-shaped, narrow, and too long led from the water up to where Carlos's truck had parked. The prints stopped right at the driver's side door. The ground was dry beyond that, bone dust sand crusted with mesquite roots. There hadn't been any rain. The seats inside the truck were soaked, as if someone had wrung out 3 soaked towels onto the fabric. Carlos said he'd never stepped into the lake. Said he'd stayed in the boat the whole time. After that, things got weird. Carlos quit fishing. He'd twitch every time he heard running water. Duct taped his shower head, bathed with a wet rag like his abuela used to. He moved his bed away from the window, then put up blackout curtains. Eventually, he stopped sleeping entirely. Enrico said he came by the ranger station twice more, raving about hearing that humming outside his trailer. Once, he said it was coming from the septic tank. Enrico chalked it up to trauma. Lake psychosis, he called it. He didn't know if that was even a real term. Then he found a fish cleaner named Miguel with similar stories. Then another, a couple from McAllen who saw 3 men smiling in the reeds as they picnicked by the shore at sunset. Always 3, always humming, always grinning, and always something breaks, phones die, motors stall, the wind dies entirely. Nature goes still in a way that feels dead, not calm. Miguel said his tackle box floated 3 feet in the air, slowly tipped, then fell into the lake like someone invisible had grabbed it. He ran. Left his rod, his cooler, even his flip-flops. He still walks with a limp, twisted his ankle scrambling. Through the brush that night. By 2020, the stories were spreading mostly among those who work the lake. Guides, rangers, smuggling spotters. You won't hear it in the news, won't find it online. But they all say the same thing. Falcon Lake isn't safe after midnight, especially near the border. They say the smiling men come out when the air's too hot, when the lake goes flat and the moon's full. They never talk, never chase. Just stand and wait and watch. You can feel them before you see them. Like a pressure in the air, like your heartbeat going wrong. And if you stare too long, they hum. I drove out there myself in October of 2023. I don't know why. Call it research, call it a midlife crisis. I told myself it was just local legend, desert heat plus a few too many tequila shots. But something kept gnawing at me. That feeling of old things in still water. I parked near the spillway at 1:38 a.m., left the car running, cracked the window. The air was thick and still. Not a sound, no cicadas, no wind. That's the thing that got me first. Nothing. Just the hollow quiet of open water and something else, something heavy. At 2:11, I saw movement down by the rocks. 3 of them. Pale. Grinning. I don't remember grabbing the flashlight. I just remember the beam catching their faces. Blank. Too long. Too narrow. Smiles like they'd been carved into dry clay. And eyes not white, not black, just ... vacant. No color at all. Nothing behind them. Not even recognition. Like they weren't looking at me, just through. The humming started. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a pull. Like gravity in the wrong direction. My head ached. I could feel my molars humming in their roots. My legs wouldn't move. My fingers twitched, like they were being strummed. Then the car lights flickered. The engine died. I ran. I don't know how far. When I finally looked back, they weren't there anymore, but the humming didn't stop for another hour. I haven't slept much since. Sometimes, I think I see footprints near my back door. Bare, narrow, too long. My faucet drips no matter how tight I turn it. And some nights around 2 ma the pipes start to vibrate. And somewhere under that hum, so faint I can barely catch it, I swear I hear them ... grinning.